Welcome back to the Four Horsemen. We've done a lot of different esports on this show, but today we are doing StarCraft for the first time, which is a bit surprising because StarCraft, arguably one of the longest, not arguably, definitely one of the longest continuously running esports, possibly the longest, actually probably is the longest at this point, Thorin, right? Quake?
Quake would be longer. Quake was like 1996 or something.
Yeah, but when we talk about...
You could argue Quake is barely alive right now, so StarCraft wins on that one, mate.
Now, StarCraft has been trucking along basically since the release of the game. It really picked up in Korea in '99 in particular. I'm sure we'll do a brief rundown of the history of competitive StarCraft with Thorin here in a moment. But joining us is longtime StarCraft commentator Kaelaris. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Hi.
So Kaelaris will be here to talk about the current state of StarCraft. And the reason why we thought this would be an interesting episode at this juncture is because, especially earlier this year, there was a lot of uncertainty about the continuation and the scene in professional StarCraft. The longtime GSL tournament, which has been running for 15 years approximately? A little over 15 years, I think, at this point in time. Had been on a hiatus for many months, and there was no news about it coming back. It has come back, but in a severely diminished form. There is now a return to crowdfunding StarCraft 2 events, and also still in Korea, which people may not be aware of, there is a thriving Brood War competitive scene that is now in its probably 25th year or so of competition, which is pretty amazing to talk about. So I think there's kind of a lot to work with here. Let's start with the brief history of competitive StarCraft with the esports historian Thorin.
Oh. So basically, StarCraft actually, if you know the release of the game, isn't too far off Quake, but bizarrely, it didn't really take off as a massive game until, as Monty says, basically like the end of the 90s, with Korea having its own like esports industry kickstart, which if people don't know, the model for that's quite obvious when you look back now. They sort of mirrored what they'd done with like the K-pop industry and how they ran like the idols and stuff like that. So they had a similar approach to how they promoted the players, which is why, even though his actual career accomplishments aren't as crazy as some other people, that's why Boxer is in theory the most important Korean esports figure ever, because he was sort of the first face or the like hero of their scene, and they were able to mass market him in a way that you could only compare the Western people like the Fatalities of the world, but even more so. And so the interesting thing was, in the early years of StarCraft, a lot of people don't know this, it actually wasn't Koreans that were the best. There actually were a bunch of Western players that were very good. Some of them even went to very early, not even just good, some of them even went to the very early tournaments that were held in Korea. But the difference was, it was just like Quake at the time, where it's more like some people run some tournaments. A lot of it's just online play, and you have the odd sort of LAN. But if you ever look at the LANs, it's people who are like, they're not pros. It's not a circuit. It's like, that might be the first time that person's gone to that tournament. And it was actually the Korean system, though, that crucially for me made it more like a PGA tour in golf, where it's the same sets of people playing every week in leagues and in competitions. And then from that, the interesting detail is, actually, in the West, we were basically on hiatus. Like, the joke is, StarCraft was only the first few years in the West. Then Warcraft 3 came along, and that was the game all the Westerners played. And Warcraft 3 was just like the Quake and the Counter-Strike circuit with the World Cyber Games and ESWC and all the big tournaments. And so if you know Western esports, you know that period. But it wasn't until basically StarCraft 2 that the whole world sort of became massive for StarCraft at the time. Now, admittedly, and this is something we will certainly get to with Kaelaris soon, I hope, a complete misunderstanding about the way StarCraft has been in esports is the notion that StarCraft became the biggest game in around 2010, 2011, that sort of MLG era when it was going to GSL was going, where Blizzard funded it initially within Korea and had big prize money. A big myth actually is that it got really massive for a few years there, then it died and no one watched it anymore. And basically, probably people are even watching this episode like, why are they talking about a game that died like 10 years ago now? Because that would be about when it would have been like 2015. But what people don't know is actually this is all relative. What happened was, it was the biggest esport at the time, and crucially, it was spotlighted by the industry as the biggest esport. They put all their attention on it, and almost every team cared the most about having their StarCraft player, even over the nascent League of Legends scene. Counter-Strike was still there. Quake at the time was even just a side game at this point. Dota actually was like pretty big, but never obviously captured the whole global audience like Korea, like League of Legends did. So what actually happened was, other games like League of Legends became bigger than StarCraft. It was never actually that StarCraft's numbers went to shit and were non-existent. It was dead. It just, relative to the others, taken off. It was essentially sort of left in the dust of the spotlight of esports. The key thing is the spotlight. Because actually, in the meantime, people won't know this. At the time you all think the game became dead, something like 3 or 4 years after that, interestingly, mainly in the West, it became enormous in a way it wasn't before. And basically, it was mainly, if you just watch GSL, it looks like it went downhill the whole time, because the Korean scene certainly did. Like, I always point this out. The Koreans used to not only have their own orgs, like T1 and stuff that were involved, but at one point in time, if they were on a Western team, they'd be on, like, Fnatic or some massive team and they'd be getting paid, like, 10k a month. The difference is, the Korean now is probably on some team you've never heard of that's like a tier 3 team from Europe, or like the 14th best team from
or
China
Falcons.
Yeah, something like that. And basically the Korean side did die off, but what people don't know is the Western side actually in the last sort of like 7 or 8 years has been enormous relative to what StarCraft used to be. As in, people like Cyril, right, here's where people won't get it. If you're thinking of a very, very myopic view of StarCraft 2, as StarCraft is like the Koreans playing the GSL, and that's the best player, and how much money does he get? Well, in the beginning, they used to get 80k, then it was like 40k, then it was like 20k. Look, we'll get to the GSL thing. It's a bit depressing, that part. It goes to almost non-existent. They almost went backwards on that one. In the West, it's the other way around. For the last 6 or 7 years, the prize money has been so much, Monty, that whereas you're going to think people like Stefano and Naniwa, they were the kings, right? No, people like Cyril have won millions of dollars in prize money. Like, think about, right, in the West, if you won the IM World Championship, maybe you got like 40k, 20k. There was that one year when Naniwa was there, they gave you 100k when it was won by Hero, I think. There's been like tons of 150k first place tournaments since then, 100k first, and people like Cyril and the other ones have all farmed off that. And they, if you ever go on esports earnings and look up StarCraft 2, you are going to see at the top, it's nearly all modern names, mate. It's not all the legends you think of. So actually the scene has been very healthy. And an interesting detail along those lines is something like, off the top of my head, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, was when Blizzard stopped themselves supporting it directly. And they essentially, so it was almost like a detransition, like you would in a country where instead of the government controlling it, like regions control it, and suddenly people like ESL were able to actually take over the circuit, which is kind of how esports began, with companies that are building it up. And then actually those companies did actually make the scene bigger and put more prize money and had more events, etc. And so if you haven't followed StarCraft 2, that's just on you. It's not the idea it wasn't there wasn't tournaments and it died off and I wish it was still. It's been here the whole time. You just didn't, and look, I didn't, but you just didn't choose to watch it. And if you actually had been, also by the way, along the way, this is a side topic, because the Korean scene died off a bit, it actually also meant, by the way, the difference is, whereas your Stefanos and the Naniwas, like maybe every now and then they could beat a Korean, the guy Cyril is actually like potentially the GOAT of StarCraft. And that's a very actually like a very spicy conversation about whether it's like the best Korean or whether there's a couple of them or whether it's Cyril actually. And that's like so even competitively, it had like quite a big sea change. So I would say it's not the biggest esport now or one of them, but I think if you look, it is actually bigger than it ever was before, even though that might sound bizarre, especially because now it's like more of a global game than just Korea siloed with their own little niche industry. It's not as big in Korea, admittedly, because they more care about League of Legends now. But the interesting thing is, the sheer amount of prize money in tournaments would probably blow people's minds. So I actually said I wanted at the beginning of this episode for people to be aware. It's actually a really weird telling of history that it's this game that was big in 2010 to 2014 or whatever, then it just died, dead game, and then no one's followed it since. And then you just assume everyone's like some weirdos playing like fucking RuneScape or something now still, but it's not. It's actually gotten bigger and it's actually had its own sort of development as a scene. And I'm obviously an outsider, but I don't claim to be sort of insider to StarCraft.
I'm glad you're a rousing cheerleader for it. I appreciate that.
You have anything to add to that characterization, Kaelaris?
By the way, if you disagree with that, come on, let me know.
I definitely don't disagree with it. The one thing I will say is it's kind of instructive about how the esports industry kind of functions, because, you know, I was there when StarCraft 2 kind of popped off, and if you remember, the reason they were able to push StarCraft 2 as a company, Activision Blizzard, was obviously there'd been that scandal in Brood War, you know, with the match fixing, and as a result of that, Korean fans have become disenchanted with Brood War. It was a big seminal moment in kind of Korean esports culture, obviously. And then Activision Blizzard were able to use that to kind of strong arm Kesper and other entities in Korea into kind of being more in line with what they wanted for StarCraft 2. And then in the Western side of things, that was the first time I ever saw an esports grift. That was the first time I ever saw the grifters. I couldn't believe it. There was people who I'd known them years, never mentioned StarCraft once, never brought up Brood War, never said anything, but they knew this game was going to be big and they knew it was going to be pushed. And so all of a sudden, everyone was an OG StarCraft fan, apparently. And this is where you saw people, everyone was vying for a job. There were people trying to commentate that were a bit fucking ropey, that had like no place in trying to be a commentator. There were people wanting the hosting gigs. And for about 2 years, I want to say, because it coincided with the rise of YouTube, the
short
Twitch,
streaming revolution, of course.
Yeah, all of that happened at this time. It sort of made StarCraft 2 this like game where everybody that was an esports fan was watching it. But I went to all these events back then. No one knew what the fuck was going on. I saw crowds cheer at the wrong time. Like, they didn't understand that somebody wasn't winning.
My joke, Richard, was always that the way you could tell
screen,
what fans thought is because casters adapted to them. And famously, when the game, if you know a StarCraft game, it's like a war. Well, at the very end of a war, when you're just about to surrender or lose, you have no position to win still. You just have to try and limit the loss or surrender. The joke is when the base would be about to be taken and you had some probes or whatever, they would still have to cast it can he hold on? He must hold the bet. It's like, you're going to cast a 200 supply army.
Yeah.
That was a lot of the early days. And by the way, even people we love, like the Total Biscuits of the world, this is the sort of atmosphere they came up in and became massive figures. Because, by the way, that in itself, Richard, sort of tells you what you mean right there. Total Biscuit was a generalized game streamer and he became a massive figure in StarCraft. It became the place to be.
He loved
it.
I
mean, John loved the game. He was really enchanted with it right from the start. And it didn't even come from the classic place with John where it was he promoted Dota a lot. For a time, but that was just because he hated Riot Games because they fucked him over. So I'm not saying he didn't love Dota, but with everything he did, running his own organization and everything, he did love StarCraft. It was a legitimate place. I had the pleasure of hiring him to work an event my company was running. But anyway, I'll throw it over to Kaelaris because this is James knows way more about the history. I had the honor of being very briefly hireable for a couple of years, where I hosted a lot of events and we've worked together.
Luckily, Riot took care of that. So shout out Riot on that one.
Yeah, they certainly did.
Where do you want me to start on all of that? That's the whole history of StarCraft, and then.
By the way, genuinely, is there any of that characterization you think I was off on, or would you frame it differently?
Not frame it differently. Obviously, there's some small nuance that's kind of missed from it, right? Similar to what Richard was saying about the scandal in Brood War really kind of causing some problems at the time and stuff like that. Obviously, StarCraft 2 had its own scandal in Korea regarding life for a lot of StarCraft fans. Obviously, he's a name that should not be named. However, from my perspective, even though he was involved in that scandal, it's undeniable that he was an amazing player. Yeah. And if he was still playing, arguably the GOAT today,
absolutely.
Which is
he was a prodigy. People don't know he was the Messi of the game. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
Written out of the history books completely, and obviously that had huge ramifications.
By the way, when he says that, he's not joking. Monty knows this. When we used to go and Monty worked at OGN, in OGN studios, they have a portrait, Kaelaris, of every winner of OGN. Now, there was one won by someone called Xavier. That never happened. He actually has an empty frame, and nobody won that tournament. But they still, they're so mad, they still put the frame up.
I mean, if you're a caster who's worked BlizzCon as basically, as Kaelaris and I have, they removed his banner from winning the world championship at BlizzCon. So there's just an empty year on the series of banners. And by the way, just as an aside, this was another match fixing scandal. Turns out it's a lot easier to match fix in 1v1 games, guys. I don't know if you knew that. So there have been a series in Brood War and StarCraft 2 of match fixing scandals, which is what Kaelaris is referring to. So yes, Kaelaris, continue.
Yeah, but it gets found out, right? And I mean, even one got found out recently, so somebody is now disqualified from our upcoming World Championship. But yeah, that had huge ramifications in the Korean scene, because before that, you had all those pro league teams, the old guard of esports teams that were in Korea, which was very important.
This is like KT, Samsung, T1.
It's all the top ones still.
Yeah, correct. So technically, for StarCraft 2, that was kind of a big deal when all of that dispersed, went away, and things like that. But thankfully for StarCraft 2, kind of the Western world picked up the slack quite considerably for that. And that is definitely one of the landmark moments. I am of the personal belief he should never be erased like that. But it's quite a contentious topic that people bring up in the scene and things like that. I can't believe his name was scrubbed off the world championship. He was the world champion.
It's also ridiculous because he didn't fix the world championship. He legit won the world championship. This is what's so annoying about it, guys, is it's not like, I mean, these people went to jail, by the way. They went to prison for this in Korea. So it's not like they weren't punished, and it's not like everybody doesn't know, and it's not like you're constantly celebrating them, but just to delete the record entirely is very weird, because what it appears like is that there wasn't a winner that year, which is just untrue. And this also was unrelated to the match fixing. So anyway,
I think what's also really important about this is that he's, at the time, right, you've got to picture this, right? At the time, this is an 18-year-old kid who is just a prodigy, a very impressionable 18-year-old kid who, when he, okay, so I don't know how much of the public knows this, but when he would go away from Korea, he'd be in Katowice, just down the road from me at the moment, playing in the Intel Extreme Masters World Championship there. He would spend thousands of dollars gambling, right? Because Koreans can't do that in Korea. So these Koreans will go and spend all of this money and stuff like that. So you're involved in that. You're losing all the prize money you've just won. You're, quite easily influenced at an age like that. And
Life would also drink very heavily at these events too. I was put that out there. He was, and he. So but the funny thing is, he would also win. He would win them.
That's the problem, Monty. You're already tapping into the fact that as Westerners, we think things differently. Like that makes him sound like some drunken Jackie Chan kung fu master who's just fucking beating everyone.
He kind of was,
which unfortunately to a Westerner sounds dope. That should be a movie, but it's obviously incredibly shameful if you're Korean. I understand. Yeah,
he kind of was though.
He kind of was, and actually, the most viewed StarCraft VOD of all time is Maru versus Live from IEM Taipei, and I think 2015. Me and Apollo are casting it back then, and it goes down to 4-3, down to the wire, all 7 games against Maru, maybe one of the greatest series of all time. And I remember our admin, there was a pause in the last game. I remember our admin telling me, I've just walked into that booth, and it reeks of alcohol. So Life is just playing the series of the century against Maru on this stage, and he was blitzed the day before, but still comes out and plays that kind of series.
I know because I was there, I know he also won IEM San Jose, like mega hungover too.
It's just, that was Life.
I mean, I'll also add this as well. Like there was a kind of ignorance in the StarCraft 2 scene because of what had happened in Brood War. People were like, well, it would never happen again in StarCraft 2. Like, that would be crazy. But, if we were to have, like, prodigious players involved in match fixing. And there were a lot of allegations that kind of went unanswered for, like, a long period of time in StarCraft 2 before we get to the big one, where Life obviously ended up getting arrested. I want to say it was Yoda as well and Gerard,
Prime House,
right?
Yeah.
In the Prime House, yeah. And it was like, prior to that, there had been a number of like other allegations leveled at like certain players. But I think people were just kind of closed off to it because they were like, it couldn't happen twice. And it absolutely did happen twice. And way more. I think a lot of it really went unchecked. And it's kind of sad because, like, the history of StarCraft. I mean, by the way, this is how I ended up. StarCraft is how I ended up becoming kind of like the esports expert in match fixing, like covering all of that and learning about it from that. And then I even got sent a bunch of stuff from this is back in 2015, and I was gonna publish an article with it, but then it was like South Korean law enforcement got involved and all this stuff, and it was like, right, well, I'll take the foot off the accelerator on that one. I don't want to fuck anything up. But yeah, it was like, it really sad because, like, Life was just one of those players where it was like, you thought he was going to be, the face of an esport for a long time to come, and obviously got tempted by, all the money that was out there. definitely had expensive taste.
Oh, by the way, one thing I didn't throw in as well, just for the sake of the complete history as well, is one of the weirdest phenomena, another thing that Westerners are just unaware of somehow, except the ones that are very, very niche and follow StarCraft, is when they made StarCraft 2, there was a contingent of people who were just like Koreans who, it's a bit like people who play CS, all they do is play StarCraft Brood War. They never went to StarCraft 2. Some of them just stayed in StarCraft Brood War. Yep. And basically, once StarCraft 2 in Korea started to die off economically, some of the old players who were the top players, like the top Kesper players, the Flashes and the J-Dongs, went back and initially just as like semi-pros or amateurs just played in these competitions they ran, ASL instead of GSL and SSL. There was a whole bunch of them back then. And basically, over the last few years, it's literally just the last few years, the prize money in those has gone crazy as well. So in StarCraft Remastered, which is basically just like a better version of Brood War, engine, etc., the remastered one, again, I would urge people, go to esports earnings and look at StarCraft Remastered. It's something like the 40th richest prize money game in the history of esports, even though it's a remastered version of Brood War.
Yeah.
If you go and look there, you will see people who have won like $300,000 prize money, even though you're thinking that's just like a version of Brood War that, you know, the odd person and his dog must watch. No, the actual viewership is way higher than you expect. And even though it's niche, the prize money is actually legit again. So the joke is, literally people like J-Dong and Flash still play it to this day, and they play in competitions that look like the GSL, and it's incredibly niche. It doesn't have the big Western spotlight, but it's also its own thriving ecosystem. So why a cool thing I actually think about this episode, Kaelaris, is because esports came from these communities, it sort of shows that you don't actually have to have the developer do everything. You don't have to have a huge top-down hierarchy. You can have these grassroots sort of efforts.
Oh, for sure. In Korea, for StarCraft 1 specifically, like all the Korean organizations had battles with Blizzard, being like, get your hands off, basically. Like, they didn't want anything to do with them. Blizzard was kind of like basically saying you're infracting upon this IP, blah, 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 and all this.
Which they were, by the way. Let's be very clear.
Monty,
they were.
That's because Korea, they're not quite as far gone as China, but they have a thing where it's sort of like, I don't care that you're some American company that say you have an IP, right? You're all doing business in Korea, doing our thing. Like, there's a little bit of friction there, put it that way.
Look, they fought the noble fight, but... Blizzard ultimately did have control over the IP they created.
It's almost taken on new life itself, though, as Brood War when it comes to the remaster and the stuff that's going on in Korea right now with the ASL and things like that, because it's not just the prize pool that you're on about, Thorin. It's also a lot of the streamer money. It's almost become like a whole reality TV thing going on. Like, all of these players are all streaming. They are getting insane levels of donations. I'm talking like,
yes,
I think I saw a number somewhere which was like $100 million.
Oh, by the way, if you're a Western
fan, something
you
crazy.
Actually now, because of streaming, get what you never got in Brood War, which is in Brood War, you only saw them play the official games. The joke is, like you're saying, in the same ways in the modern day, XQC would play with some other person and they do collab streams. They all do that. Like, the joke is people like Flash and Beast who just play each other all the time because their fans want to see that, so they get all crazy donations for doing it. So it's actually like a very vibrant scene, yeah.
Or they're just eating food.
Yeah, they do the mukbang and all shit. Yeah.
So let me
war story.
We've got a new sponsor here on the Four Horsemen, and it is Sleeper, which is a daily fantasy sports app. They're now including esports, and so they have the major where you can go and make your picks. And I'm going to make a couple of picks for you for two of the quarterfinals that I would recommend. These would be my expert advice. So first of all, in the Vitality versus Na'Vi game, obviously a rematch with slightly different roster of that banger IM Cologne final, I'm going to take Ziwu over the first two maps to get more than 35.5, because I actually think this is a matchup where he is going to absolutely eat. They're going to get to play stuff like potentially their Inferno, potentially a Mirage. So I think it's actually going to be some of the best maps for Vitality, and I think he destroys Wonderful. So I think he's going to be in prime position to absolutely feast over these two maps, and 35.5, that's not that much over two maps for Z, who's the best player in the world right now. Then for the other quarterfinal, I am going to take in the Mongols versus FaZe Clan matchup. We obviously saw this already in the Swiss, didn't we? I'm going to go the side of FaZe for this matchup. I think they've got a pretty good game into the Mongols. People know the Mongols tend to choke on stage. This is a major playoffs. I know what happened at the last major playoffs. So I am going to take Mazinho, the really young player for Mongols, who is very good. He's one of the best players along with Senzu. He is on 28.5k kills over the first 2 maps is the offer here, I'm going to say he gets less than that. That he has a bad performance, he gets fragged by Simple and Frozen and Elysian, these massive names and outcalled, and the stage is going to get to him, and unfortunately he's going to have a bad game. So I'm going to say he's going to get less than that amount. Now, if you want to take advantage of these picks that I've made, check out the Sleeper app. You can win up to 1000x payouts. They have all sorts of different promos all the time. They have a combo play feature where if you miss your picks on your Sleeper entry, you can still cash in with combo play. They have all sorts of like chat functionality, so you can actually connect with other fans from sports, or in this case esports. If there's injuries in traditional sports, they actually void the contest. They have, it's only $1 as a minimum entry. They have all sorts of tracking for fantasy numbers, etc. It's really simple. It's like about 30 seconds to make a pick, basically. And it's currently operational in over 30 states in the US. So download the Sleeper app to play daily fantasy and receive a match up to $100 on your first deposit with code HORSEMEN. Follow along with our picks over the course of the Austin Major.
Let me go back a little bit if we're going to talk about Brood War and talk about because we hit on Brood War at the start of it, but the reason why these are still among the biggest streamers in Korea, because you might be like, who wants to watch a bunch of 40-year-old dudes like us, on a stream? But these guys, if you look back to when they were popular or when they became popular, so this would be the mid 2000s approximately. So most of these guys were famous either in the early, like between 2000 and 2010, let's say, was when they started getting popular within that decade. And part of this was that esports wasn't available in the West because the broadcasts weren't good. Like the packaging around esports was really nothing during that time period in the West. However, Korea had television stations that were doing studio tournaments, and really that's the origin of all esports broadcasts now came out of Korea. So this would be something in the pre-streaming days, because remember, you couldn't just watch this at home on your computer. This had to be sent out on TV to watch. So there were 2 main networks, OGN on GameNet and MBC Game, that were the primary drivers of StarCraft Brood War productions within Korea, and they both had kind of tournaments that would run. So they had the MSL, which is NBC's, and then you had Pro League, which was on OGN, and then also the OSL, which is the OGN Star League, right? And essentially, like, these ran for I think the OSL ran for 40 seasons. I should know the answer to that because I actually casted the last OSL. Whoops. I think it was 42.
Some fucking league. I
think it was 42. Monty killed the OSL. Yeah, I actually did. Doe and I cast the finals to that. Maru won. Anyway. So what ended up happening is that during this time period, as Thorin said, they kind of K-popified, or it was kind of like professional wrestling. I think a lot of, just talking to the producers at OGN, a lot of the early inspiration came from professional wrestling as to how they were going to present the players. And so during this time period, the reason why Brood War actually got so popular, some people say it's because the Asian financial crisis happened in 99 when the expansion, so they think the expansion to Brood War came out, just StarCraft Brood War came out in 98. And so 99, there's a huge recession in Asia. There are all these people out of work in Korea. And what do? They go to the PC bangs, the PC cafes, and there's this brand new game,
on
StarCraft.
Every corner as well. There's a million.
Yeah, on every corner. Yeah. And so everybody's playing this game. They realize they can make it competitive. They create their own leagues.
By the way, the analogy I would give is that what people don't get is at the time in the West to have a PC, I'm sure we all had one, you either cost a lot of money, that was your whole Christmas present, or like you just didn't have a PC and you had like a cheap console. At the time, you have to think of playing StarCraft like going to an arcade where you just go and pay the $1 to play the one game now. Like you're going just to buy an hour now. You don't have to have the PC. You don't have to have a whole setup. Yep. That's the genius of it.
And it's worth noting that one of the reasons why Blizzard was so angry later on about StarCraft 2 was because most of these copies were pirated in the PC bonds, because the games were really easy to pirate back in the days, guys. Like the security feature was a key code on the CD case, on like the jewel case of the CD that it came in. However, key gens were really easy for people to make, so everybody could crack this disc. I myself cracked StarCraft on like a million different computers. I had a legit copy as well. I did. I'm not lying. I did. But
They're not going to get you.
So he said that as all makes it right.
I did have the legit copy, but also when you wanted to install it on like a million PCs, you couldn't be online with like the same key code. So if you wanted to play your friend off of one copy, you basically had to crack it on a different computer. Anyway, we all did that about a million times. But this is to say that StarCraft kind of became popular without Blizzard making money in Korea, not only from the broadcast side, because the broadcast was completely running independently of Blizzard. They were totally just using Blizzard's IP for like 10 plus years.
By the way, Monty, one thing I will say, the one thing on the IP thing I do agree with Blizzard is, though, it's that people like OGN started copyright striking things on YouTube as though they owned the IP. Like, I will say, that's called being a little bit too fucking spicy with it, Korea. You know what I mean? If you're sort of like legally getting away in a grey area of like, it's not really my thing I own, you can't then go, by the way, I own this, to take that shit down because I own it. Like, yeah, you are sort of making a bold statement when you do it. I think that was their fuck up, if you ask me. You know?
So anyway, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that it directly ties into the here and now, because if you look at the people who are watching Brood War during that time, this is a lot of people who are part of Gen X or older millennials. These people are all in their 40s and 50s now, and they have money. And so what happened is the heroes from this era, the Flashes, the Jaedongs, all of these guys who, and look, even, here's the thing, even Savior's back in streaming. You know what I mean? Yeah. So all these guys, they had to go through prison if you're Savior, but also military service if you're most of the other people. And they kind of came out on the other side of this. Some of them tried to get into StarCraft 2, like Flash dabbled in it for a little bit of time. You saw even some Warcraft 3 pros like Moon and Grubby like move over to StarCraft 2 and try and like crack into the top ranks. None of them ever really did as well in StarCraft 2. It's a very different game. But many of them, as Thorin said, returned to StarCraft Brood War, and now they stream on the Korean streaming platforms that many of you guys probably are not watching. And they do have very large audiences, and they do make a killing in donations because they have a lot of older rich people who watch them who never really wanted to move on from Brood War. These are the people who have the fond memories of playing this game in the PC bongs in 2003.
Yes.
And they're just going to stick with it, and they're going to keep giving donations to Flash forever, basically.
Yeah. Just on Team Liquid right now, if you went there literally this second, Brittany, for example, on Brood War, 51,000 viewers. Brittany's not even a player that's really competing for a title, right? Like, it's just, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and you also see this, and I think people don't understand, but when we say the ASL, that's the Africa TV Star League, which is going into its 19th season. If you are a StarCraft fan, you're probably familiar with the fact that Tasteless and Artosis have crowdfunded their own English casting of this, and Brood War is still very nostalgic for...
That's how you know there's still money in the game.
It's true.
I love them, but they love money, so it's all good. It's all good.
But I mean, if you actually just look, so there is Soop, SOOP, which is the name of the streaming platform these days in Korea, has an Soop English YouTube channel where they host the VODs for this. And I need you guys to understand, not only do Tasteless and Artosis have thousands of people signed up to the Patreon, okay? When they release the English language VODs for ASL, that Tasteless and Artosis, they don't even cast this live, guys. They record it after the fact, okay? And they release it as VODs. These VODs are getting over 100,000 views on YouTube each for English Brood War content in 2025. So you guys don't hear about this, but there is a large group of people that are supporting the content, the Brood War content that's coming out, even outside of Korea, which I think is particularly impressive.
Two things that I think are probably going on. The first is related to my initial point, which is just no one really cares about esports in esports, do they? Really, right? So, I mean, like, because those guys that, like, were fans in 2009, 2010, 2009, when the game was announced that it was going to be coming and everyone was making, a rush to get in on the ground floor, they'd still be talking about it now in 2025, right? But they're not, right? And no one talks about StarCraft. I mean, like, very briefly with Cyril You know, when back when the esports
look, a white guy's winning in StarCraft.
Yeah, exactly.
He was on for his token year.
The greatest foreigner of all time. No, he's not, but whatever. So there was that. But also, what makes me worried and anxious about all of this is it's probably gambling, isn't it? And, you know, if it's gambling, there's probably some dodgy stuff going. That's all I'm going to say. Because it just is.
I'll say one thing to Ed Richards' point, which is this might sound counterintuitive, but if you follow the logic, it does make sense. The fact that the reaction to the Saviour and the Life scandals was so huge that they wanted them to be put in prison. Yep. Remember, in the West, the FBI even said they were looking into CS match fixing and just stopped. Like, they don't even give a fuck about it in Western countries, right? Because it was so massive. And then especially the social shame was so great. If you don't remember, back then, stuff happened. Like, when Saviour came out, people who were like the head coaches of Kesper teams were using language as though he'd like murdered someone, mate. Like, they were super... Because the backlash is so harsh in their honor-based culture, it also, in a counterintuitive sense, means that it is also suppressed when there's like mild rumors of it that happen, because you either have to go all in when you have the reaction against it. So basically, like, Monty knows this, it never happened in League of Legends, Kaelaris, but essentially there was a thing like this in early League of Legends that almost popped off. And essentially the sort of open secret behind the scene in the Korean scene was just don't talk about this, because again, you have to either completely expose it and we root them all out, but what you can't allow is the notion that it's happening, but no one can do it.
Kaelaris, in the early days of Korean League of Legends, there people knew about match fixing that was going on.
With like, again, really legendary players that you would know if I said the name of it.
Yes.
Like actual
not Faker, by the way. Don't worry about it.
No. Actual champions.
It's not Faker. But other people, not on T1. Anyway, the problem is that basically because of the StarCraft scandal, the journalists and the scene was basically unanimous in suppressing this because they said, we can't say it or it's going to kill League of Legends.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't do anything.
Yep.
And the journalists who depend on esports for their jobs also buried it.
Because they've seen it happen.
Yeah.
So just to say, it's not the fact that you haven't heard about other big scandals doesn't mean Richard's wrong. If anything, actually, I would imagine at this point in time, like I say, unless it's something completely out, they're just going to sort of pretend it doesn't exist, unfortunately.
This was also before the Life revelation.
Yeah, a couple of years before.
Well, you also have to remember, so one of the things that was going on at the end of StarCraft 2, well, the end of, but you know, the end of it,
like the famous aspect,
popularity. Sure. Yeah, there was basically tournaments being run where you would never have heard of this tournament organizer before, you know, so it would be called the, like, you know, the big dick fucking trophy, you know, like, and you'd be like, what? And there'd be like 8 players in it. And all those results were fixed. And all of those results were fixed. And not only were they fixed, you would be like, why is there this, like, why is somebody watching this clean feed? You know, what are these Chinese pictograms, right? What's happening here? That's not Korean. And basically, there was like a number of betting syndicates that had figured out if you want to not have the negative attention of fixing matches, what you do is you simply run the tournament yourself.
Right.
And all of the invited players are essentially co-conspirators, and it plays out the way it's going to play out with all of the results essentially a contrivance. And that was happening a fair bit, actually. Russia and China being the two biggest regions for that.
You will also note as well, the place it's most rife is where, again, Western authorities can't have any influence, can't do anything about it. Like, by the way, good luck telling the Chinese government, can you stop these people match fixing in a video game? They're going to put the phone down. It's not even going to happen. You know?
Stop. Easy. Just not going to work, is it, right? So, that would be my worry, that, like, probably the Brood War scene, like, looking at this, you know, I'm looking at these, you know, small prize pools with unheard of players playing it out. It's probably a large betting culture, and if there's a large betting culture, then where there are large betting cultures, there's always match fixing. That's just how that one goes. So, not to rain on anyone's parade. Wow, it's great. Love some Brood War.
I just think it's interesting that Brood War is just still very much alive and is arguably getting healthier as time goes on as well, not only from the Korean perspective, but also from the Western perspective as well. And that there has been enormous success from Tasteless and Artosis in making sure that this content comes out in English.
I think, though, at the same time, you're saying that it is still very heavily skewed to Korea. Like, the West still, as much as these VODs get 100,000 views or whatever with Tasteless and Artosis, some of that viewership is just watching for them, not exactly just for StarCraft 1.
That was always true, though.
And they've built their brands over many years. It's understandable. Yeah, they've got a parasocial relationship with fans, of course.
Yeah. But I think if you asked a lot of like StarCraft fans, you would genuinely say 95% of that audience is still in Korea.
Right.
You don't have your StarCraft 1 players, rising up the ranks in the Western world and trying to compete.
Yes, that's true.
That's not going to happen. Even though there are still...
Oh, yeah, you're right. Actually, I've just realised, you're right. In some ways, StarCraft Remastered has also, recontextualised that part. It's just done the same thing with Brood. It's all Koreans again. It's not really Western players involved, right? Whereas StarCraft 2 is all the Westerners, right?
There is some Western tournaments going on. In fact, there was one in Krakow like a few months ago, which I was unable to go to. I was keen to actually go down to it because there was a lot of the best players coming in from the Western world to actually play here as well. So there is still a little scene going on in the Western world, but yeah, it's 95%, even with those viewership metrics. I would say still 95% Korea.
Yeah. I mean, look, you also have to understand, I've written about this. I wrote a whole chapter about essentially deconstructing the myth of esports mecca in South Korea, because like I've read a lot of, I'm obviously not going to name names, but I've read a lot of shitty esports books, let's put it that way. And the one thing they all love to do is, you'll never guess what, there's this mythical place, like it's fucking Narnia or something. You're just talking about Seoul. There's this mythical place where these players can't even walk down the street.
By the way, Western esports fans still believe this, Richard. Before they go there, the obvious analogy is like the really weirdo guy who's super in anime and then goes to Japan and thinks he's going to actually be greeted by like anime waifu girls as opposed to people who are like, you're fucking gross. Like, so they think when they touch down in fucking Incheon that like fucking fakers there with like a, hey, drink Coke, like, like fucking, they think everyone knows that shit. But it's like, it's still niche, guys. I
will say, when I lived here the last time and my visa was connected to OGN, I did have a surprising number of like visa officers at the airport be like, oh, I like OGN, and then they'd like talk to me about Brood War.
Yeah, but here's the
when
thing,
I would
Monty,
like, be coming into the country.
They think you're pushing the button.
Are you ready though? Here's what they said to you, Monty. I'll guarantee. I don't even know the conversation. I'll guarantee they went Im Yo-wan. So they know a boxer who, by the way, at this point has been retired for about fucking 7 years. They had no fucking clue who the current OSL champion was. So it's got its own special niche. By the way, I always describe it this way: a lot of people I talk to, taxi drivers, people who just were generally in Korea when I lived there, a lot of them said this same thing, which is almost the same line. They would go, "Oh yeah, I know Brood War. It's something we all did when we were 12.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's true.
So people don't realize that actually, it's not a mecca of esports, and actually, it's still pretty. If you're a South Korean kid and you tell your parents, "I'm going to be a professional esports player,"
it doesn't
way
go well
worse
for
than in the
rest
West.
of the time.
Way worse.
No, I mean, and I know this firsthand. We helped a player called Violet back when I used to be the editor of Cadred. We had a great young journalist there called Jeff Kim. And he was friends with Violet, and he said he's a super cool, talented player, and he's not getting a lot of exposure. And we kind of, we wrote a number of articles about him and stuff. And it was really cool to kind of see his rise. But yeah, like when I think about, almost every Korean player has the same story in a way, the same origins, which is they were doing this thing and their parents hated it. And then one day it paid money and the parents tolerated it. And then they made a lot of money and then it was okay. And that's pretty much every, player.
And also a lot of them come from poor families.
Yeah. But you have to understand as well, the only reason StarCraft ever took off, it really was the perfect storm. So ultimately, the thing Monty already talked about how you could copy. Well, so okay, let's start. Why are PC games popular in South Korea? Well, consoles they have this trade embargo, tariffs, if you like, which are a popular topic to talk about right now, where you can't buy a Nintendo unless you're very wealthy because of
to be clear, to this day, it is still. You can get consoles in Korea, but it's like annoying. They're not ubiquitous. So, you have to go to like certain shops. I mean, obviously with the internet, it's easier these days. But for many like decades in Korea, it was hard to get consoles.
Yeah, it was, and basically it's like you say, it was the.
And also, games were not translated into Korean either, which would be another problem. Yes. So they were in English or Japanese.
Yeah. No localization either, yeah. So nobody's playing consoles, everyone's playing PCs. Then you have, there was they had a recession. And this was at the time when the government had already like pledged, we're going to put broadband everywhere and in everyone's houses. We're going to have like the best. We're going to win the internet arms race, essentially. And so that was going on even during a recession. And so one of the ways people got themselves out of the recession, you could get a loan to start a small business. And one of the easiest business to run was the PC banks. And obviously you were getting government essentially broadband, you were going to have sick internet in there, and so people were building these PC
and the population density in Seoul, which has 26 million people in it, is sufficient that you can open a lot of these and people will go
and growing.
Yeah, and so people were founding those. Then I only have to buy one. By the way, the overheads are insane. I just need several PCs good enough to run StarCraft, but I only have to buy StarCraft once
or zero.
The fucking or zero. Don't even have to buy it really. And so the games that were popular on the PCs were the ones that, as you said, they didn't require an individual copy for each of the PCs. It was the ones you could essentially just have on 80 PCs or whatever it was. So then you have that, but then obviously we've still got the recession problem. So what people were doing for entertainment at this time was essentially like quite cheap, lo-fi, I want to say reality TV, like James said earlier. And so that was where you started essentially showing these games. Everyone's playing StarCraft. Everyone knows StarCraft. The good players at StarCraft kind of getting this like underground buzz. We need to put cheap TV. No one's got any money. We're coming out of a recession. We need to put cheap TV onto our TV stations. So let's start highlighting StarCraft. And so ultimately, you do have, this is what it takes for an esports title to be successful. It is like a perfect storm almost every time.
And you'll notice that with StarCraft, it had a huge player base, which then translated into a huge viewer base, right? The player base had to come first.
Yeah, exactly. And so, people think like, oh, you can just make a sick game and drop it into the ecosystem and people will play it and it'll get popular and then you'll have an esport. It just doesn't work like that. In fact, if you look at the success of almost every esports title, there is some insane, confluence of circumstance that has to occur for it to get
It's why
good.
when everyone in the years before Remastered was huge again, used to say to Artos, are you going to move to this new RTS game? And it'd be like, why would they? He hasn't fucking done anything yet. Like, you have to have you have to build it before they come. You have to have the view. When you have the view base, then you can have the tournaments. Obviously, developer helps too. But the joke would be, the obvious contrast to that, Richard, is Overwatch, they tried to do the opposite. They had players, but it wasn't hardcore viewers. They tried to say, right, if we make the esports thing, then people will watch. It's like, it sort of works the other way around.
Yeah, but which, again, the perfect kind of inverse to what happened with Brood War, which was very organic and slow over time. But there's this myth that South Korea, the Koreans were just so technologically advanced for the time. They recognized immediately the potential of video games, and everyone dialed in. And StarCraft was this incredible cerebral game. So none of that happened. It was like literally, it was cheap fodder. It was a cheap means for entertainment, and it essentially was the preserve and the hobby of a lot of poor people in South Korea, as crazy as that sounds. Because over here in the West, like PC gaming, that there's an immediate barrier to entry. in socio-economic terms. But in South Korea, with the PC ban culture, basically you could get incredible value.
It's why I point out the analogy, because if you were from the old days, this did exist in the West, is essentially they used a PC and a PC bang like an arcade machine. Like, it was a thing back in the day to go and play Street Fighter or something like that in an arcade. You didn't own the machine, obviously. You just go play for an hour, don't you?
Also, I mean, here's another thing. If you're a newer PC gamer, you might be like, well, PCs aren't that expensive, right? You don't have to upgrade them that often. Guys, in the 90s and 2000s, PCs were really fucking expensive. And you had to upgrade them all the time, too, to play the new games. You can get away with not upgrading your graphics card for 5 or 6 years and be fine. You can still play the games, maybe not at the highest resolution or frame rate or graphical settings, but the pace of technology has slowed down pretty significantly, whereas in the 90s and 2000s, it was like flying on PC. And so it was a probably several $1,000 a year habit, if we're being honest with. I mean, you probably need a new PC every 2 years, and that's not an exaggeration if you wanted to stay up with the latest games.
Notice there, Monty, what you're also inadvertently highlighting is in the West, actually PC gaming, which was the main esport, was actually the domain of middle class and upper class people who have disposable income where their dad can buy them a PC or has a PC already. What we're pointing out is in Korea, this was like the youth culture. That was what it was, like an alternative nerd youth culture where this is what you go and do. I mean, the joke literally is the way that this is the thing that's always misunderstood by Westerners. They also say that classic line that has never been true, which is it's just accepted there, unlike in the West. It's the opposite. To this day, it is still not accepted unless you've already succeeded. As in, even if you are Flash, they don't actually say it's okay you're playing this game instead of being a doctor from Seoul University until you've won the hundreds of thousands and you got the massive contract. So what people don't know is it's the other way around. The genius was you would tell your mum, I'm going to the library to study for school. She'd give you the $5 so you could get a snack, and you just secretly went to the PC bang with your friends. That was being a rebel, and played StarCraft for 5 hours. So it's actually the fact that they thought you were doing the schoolwork and being a super nerd, which shows how harsh their culture can be, is actually what was like the secret, like where you could like get out and play video games, because it was a weird subculture.
Yeah, it was for sure. So look, to move out of the distant past and into more of the present, it's kind of interesting to see where StarCraft is overall, because it is still getting some recognition at like big tournaments and stuff. Like, it was included in the esports World Cup, for instance. It wasn't.
By the way, technically it would be one of the biggest games. Bear in mind, it's a 1v1 game. So if you win like 150k for the esports World, that is enormous in esports context.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. They actually did put up a decent prize pool there, and a number of old tournament organizers are coming back. Like, I want to say, I heard is there another Home Story Cup coming up?
There is.
Right,
Home Story Cup
They've always been doing those. Yeah. They're crowdfunded too now.
Crazy.
They're all crowdfunded as far as I know, right?
Yeah.
For a long time.
It's crazy. It's crazy that's still going after all this time.
Considering that we have 2 award-winning journalists, and of course myself, here on the Four Horsemen, we are serious about security. And just like you wouldn't drive around without car insurance, it's just not worth the risk. You shouldn't be heading online, particularly on public Wi-Fi networks, without a VPN. And especially if you're traveling around the world, you may never know which ISPs or countries are looking at the traffic from your phone or your laptop or any other internet connected devices that you have with you. And even if you live in America, your ISPs can still take the data from your browsing and sell it, which is probably something you don't want. And this is all easily solved by our sponsor, ExpressVPN. It's incredibly secure. It would take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to get past ExpressVPN's encryption, and it's incredibly easy to use. I have it on my phone basically all the time. The mobile app is very easy. Also comes with a PC app for your laptop or your desktop. You can even install it onto some routers and protect your entire network if you so desire. And as we always say, if you follow along with movies with us over on 4Play, well, there's an opportunity here to watch movies with the the streaming services that you guys already pay for. For example, Netflix has different films available in different geolocations around the world, and ExpressVPN can help you unlock that for these subscriptions that you already pay for. It's also been rated #1 by top tech reviewers like CNET and The Verge. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/horsemen. That is plural, MEN. That's expressvpn.com/horsemen to find out how you guys can get up to 4 extra months free. expressvpn.com/horsemen.
So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like I say, it's just one of these things. You wouldn't know it was happening because people don't talk about this stuff anymore.
I think what's so interesting, and we'll get Kaelaris' take on this about the early days versus contemporary days of StarCraft, because as the state of StarCraft, we need to talk about, how things have changed. But we all have to remember that in the West, StarCraft started out as a community-funded endeavor. So in 2007, in Brood War, GOM TV started streaming StarCraft in English. And this was well before Twitch or any real streaming services in the West. So you had to download a piece of software, the GOM TV player, to watch it live. Or they had if you were a subscriber, a password-protected website for the VODs where they would upload the videos. But in 2007, they were, and I was one of the subscribers back in the day, they were charging $20 a month in 2007 for access to the stream and also to the VOD library. And people paid this. And Blizzard eventually shut this down, hilariously. So they did 3 seasons and then Blizzard nuked it. And then we get the GSL later,
By
which
the way,
is,
Monty,
also...
that's even how different culture was in esports back then. Now, I'll give the equivalent. When people make fun of someone who has the blue check mark because they paid the $8 on Twitter or X.com, right? That's actually sort of how esports Zoomer culture is. They all laugh at the idea you'd pay for esports. Back then, Monty, the era you're talking about, you were uncool if you didn't have a GSL pass. You're not a real fan then. Well,
it's also that, it's a question of value. And this is what I always thought interesting. When I was paying $20, when I was a college student at the time, so it's not like I had a lot of fucking money, I paid $20. I didn't have any, obviously there were no streaming subscriptions in 2007, or if there were, maybe Netflix had just started it or something like that. But it was, whatever. Anyway, I thought it was great value because when I thought about how many hours of content every month was coming out of the GSL, it was something like 80 hours a month. It was like 20 hours a week of games.
Remember,
so I was watching so much of this.
Games, man. It
It was something like, I was like, I'm paying 25 cents an hour for this. I was like, this is the cheapest form of entertainment of all time. I'm definitely getting money. And so people were paying this amount of money. And this is where the English crowd support starts. And this is what is now propelling StarCraft on the English language side. And for all the people who have said things like, well, I would never pay a subscription fee for, to watch esports. I will also say that in the early days of OGN, when I was casting, when you had to be Twitch subscribed to the OGN channel, OGN was making over $1 million a year just off of Twitch subs in 2013. So imagine how much they'd be making now if they had, put 1080p in VODs behind a paywall. The thing is, you may not reach those same peaks of viewership, but as we have seen in esports, the sponsors are not paying enough money for those peaks of viewership. And so it's all the devs and the teams losing money. And if we had fewer viewers, but more paying viewers, then this thing might actually be significantly more sustainable, which I think is the direction we're inevitably kind of trending in as developers become less and less interested in bankrolling this bullshit. That and of course, ESL and EWC taking over everything for other reasons, right? But when we look at what is going on within the StarCraft scene, it did start for English content in a very healthy place. And I think, Kaelaris, you can probably talk about this, but GOM TV and the GSL was initially highly powered by English-speaking viewers and financially, right? Huge audience. And when we talk about how other esports came up, so in the early days, it wasn't like StarCraft viewership was really going down. It's just that League of Legends viewership was exploding and it was becoming bigger. And StarCraft was, even if it was the biggest esport, it was never the size of League of Legends. It was never the size of Counter-Strike these days. The audiences are so much bigger now. It was the biggest at the time, but it was also supported by a group of people who were paying, tens of thousands of people who were paying actively subscriptions in order to watch this content because they were hardcore fans. And that's what made this whole thing valuable. And that's where we started off in StarCraft on the English side.
So there's a lot to unpack there. In terms of, yes, against like League of Legends and CS and where they've gone to, StarCraft didn't really like lose their, even though at one point we were the biggest, we didn't lose our audience to
exactly.
We just plateaued whilst the other ones grew.
Yes.
We hit our peak and plateaued, and that plateaued stayed there for a long, long time. When we used to do Blizzard summits, and we would go in and they would tell us about the player base figures and all of this stuff. And deep into the years of everybody else saying StarCraft 2's dead or whatever, blah, blah, blah. 300,000 people on the ladder, all of these kinds of numbers coming out. And yes, okay, that slightly declined over the years since we did those summits, but still, ladders were very active for a long time and things like that. Now, to what you were saying about the pay subscription at the beginning, I think it goes hand in hand with a little bit with the way in which people consumed Brood War media and studied Brood War games in those early years. And then obviously we have an older audience, so they're a bit more willing to actually spend money, which I know, Richard, for you is something that, esports fans don't spend money, but thankfully in StarCraft, they are able to part with their cash a little bit more. But it comes back to the idea of like, in Brood War,
I will say StarCraft fans have probably paid the most money per fan of any esport audience ever, and I doubt it's anywhere close. I don't even think it's I think we're probably talking about like 10-1 on the next biggest one. Like it's probably enormously in favor of StarCraft.
Yeah, if there's a sponsor that suddenly comes in for a StarCraft tournament, they're getting eyes on their product. I guarantee you. And some of those people will go out and check things out, blah blah blah, and whatnot. Probably do some purchases anyway. I don't have metrics for that, but what I was saying is that in Brood War, when you had people trying to study games and things like that and whatever, getting like a single replay of a Korean player to look at or be able to dive into a little bit more would be like gold dust, because in these early days, you really couldn't get anything right like that. So moving on to GOM TV and GSL and how everything broke down in terms of the VODs and stuff and charging for all of that stuff, I think the community was already indoctrinated to this idea of like, oh, being able to go back and watch a lot of this stuff, on a whim when you didn't have things like Twitch and readily available YouTube stuff, it actually does have inherent value. So that's really what helped that as time went on. And as it's really gone further, people are still willing to part ways with some of the money, which is why all of our Patreons for ASL, for RSL, for all of the other crowdfunded stuff, which I have a huge list of, does very well. Very well.
Yeah. And I'll throw a hot take out there that I don't know if anybody has actually made before, which is that I think that the subscription element increased the zeal of the fans because they felt like they had to watch more of it because they were paying for it. And therefore, it also helped form communities of people who are very excited and extremely involved in this thing because it wasn't really possible to be casual. You were paying $20 a month, 20 years ago, which was a lot. It was more money then at that point in time, obviously because of inflation. But because if you were doing this, you were really all in on it. This was probably your main form of entertainment. And therefore, you were interested in connecting with other fans who shared these interests and making communities on social media about it and staying engaged and bringing your friends in and having it be a core part of the things that you and your friends talked about. So I think weirdly, like amongst the people who were converts, it probably made them more zealous about the content in the end.
Yeah. I mean, I'll add as well. Like it's the big schism in where esports sort of went wrong for me. And also looking back, I was on the wrong side of the argument because I remember when MLG announced that they were going to go pay-per-view, and they did like they did some invitational events, which it was like, I don't know, $10 or something to watch. And I remember there was like a divide in the StarCraft community where, you know, people were like, well, look, we pay for GOM, why wouldn't we pay for MLG? And people were like, yeah, but with GOM, you know, you get all this stuff. Plus, they've earned our trust over a period of time with a quality product, and we don't really know, you know, if we're going to like MLG as much, because that was... it was when Axel Toss and Axelav were the commentators, right, over there.
Yeah, they were full-time employees of MLG at the time.
Yeah, and everyone was like, don't like them as much as Tastos and stuff. So anyway, that for me is where it went wrong, because essentially what other TOs started doing was they started overlapping their events with a pay-per-view event, and their event would be free. And this is what caused the initial, you know, kind of war between all the tournament organizers, you know, the DreamHacks and the ESLs and the MLGs, when they all came together and they did that fake announcement that we're all going to cooperate moving forward. Totally bogus, and nothing came of it. But that was the point where esports kind of went wrong for me, because we ended up not normalizing pay-per-view in the West. We ended up moving away from it and criticizing MLG. How dare you?
Yeah. There was a lot of backlash. If I recall correctly, it was 2012, and it was MLG Winter, and I think it cost $20. And I remember very specifically because, I was in Finland watching it in the middle of the night, and it was like Domrigu, Hook, and all these players, and it was very divisive. I was totally okay with the idea, because how... In the grand scheme of things, how are you going to keep this going if there isn't an exchange somewhere about this? I've always been very concerned about how all of these esports fans or whatever consume media, because everything they're so entitled. Unfortunately, everyone just wants everything for free, and it's like, this can't be the way. This is not sustainable in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and so what we ended up getting is a couple years after this, 2013, 2014, I forget when it started, was WCS, which is the, you know, when Blizzard started following the models of other developers. They basically, they created a new...
Here's the thing, they had WCS before, but it was just a tournament circuit. 2013 was when they did like the regions and the studios, things like ESL ran it.
So basically, you know, they created a global, they globalized the game. They created all these different regions. They frankly fucked up GSL, which was very sad, because GSL was the premier StarCraft league. Because at this point in time, you know, the Kespa teams, so like T1 and KT and Genair and these big orgs were all coming over and saying, like, okay, well, we're going to run teams. And then also OGN, who I worked for at the time, was saying, well, we want a piece of this StarCraft 2 action as well, because GOM TV had a kind of a monopoly on it in Korea, right? And so Blizzard basically divided up the circuit between OGN and GOM, which was, I think, bad. As somebody who was on the OGN side, I think it was bad for StarCraft 2. And I didn't want anything to do with it at the time. I just had to do it because I was casting this game. Look, I grew up watching Brood War, so I wasn't sad about casting Star League. It was kind of a dream for me, but I will say I don't think it was the best product idea. And so, Kaelaris, what are your thoughts on the creation of WCS? Because what's interesting is that, as we talk about, we have the initial period of StarCraft, which is very Wild West, very organic. Then you have the, quote, modern esports framework getting slapped on it. And then we have that framework being dissolved, and we're kind of back to the grassroots now, which is what we're going to get to. But what's your take on like the creation of WCS and what that did for the scene? It's a very controversial topic, guys. It was at the time too. People were mad.
It's what got me and Duncan cast out of StarCraft, by the way. Essentially,
was it?
So yeah. Our thoughts on WCS.
Was it the region lock
Yes,
bit,
essentially, here's the problem, Kaelaris. At the time, there was a lot of people, there's a classic quote like this, where essentially their livelihood was tied up with exactly this regionalisation and Western, and so essentially, by speaking against it, we were heretics, and we were sort of like, we'd committed the ultimate sin of saying the fucking forbidden reality of it all. Even though if you ever listen back, it seemed tame as fuck now, mate. If you went back, it'd just be like the reasonable analysis of what was going on.
I went overnight from being a beloved host, right? Like, 'cause it's crazy. Like, that was the community that embraced me first of all. It was the first time I'd ever been an esports host, and also the guy that's looked out for StarCraft because of the Land of Broken Promises articles. And
you cared?
I was the one. Yeah, I did. I gave a shit back then, right? And not like now. But then overnight, because I said like, region locking is a bad thing. And not the direction that WCS should be going in, because ultimately we're propping up weaker regions, and that's how you essentially kickstart the death of a scene. Once you start propping up bad regions that can't compete, you're going to find yourself in a death spiral. Ultimately, that was my point, and I'd seen it with other games, and me and Duncan and I made this point. I think it was on one of Chanman's podcasts. Can't remember which one it was.
It was the one where they made
Duncan
that special one only for that episode, which was essentially the No Destinies episode. Yeah. I wouldn't appear on the show with Destiny, so it was like esports uncensored or something like that, unfiltered as much.
Unfiltered.
Yeah, Duncan had great luck with Chanman podcasts. Like, I want to say,
I tapped out. I learned my lesson.
Yeah. Right. He had the Destiny one where he went off. He had the Poland one. He had the Lycan one where we would just live when we were doing the warm up. Like, every time Duncan went on, something fucked up. But anyway, to tee it up for James.
Thankfully, since then, though, no problems.
There was never a problem again.
And it was never a problem again. We all lived happily ever after. But obviously, just to tee it up for James, basically, the creation of WCS and anyone trying to critique it, you had to be all in. It felt like the community was all in on it. It felt like the people that were working in the space were all in on it. And ultimately, I do feel a little bit vindicated by the direction WCS went in, and particularly what region locking did for StarCraft.
Yeah, Kaelaris, can you describe WCS for people who don't understand it? Because, like, Richard's mentioned the region locking, but what did that really mean in the context of when this came out?
Just after I mention what I was going to relate to Richard, because I'm convinced my stance, which is very similar on region locking, cost me a BlizzCon, despite covering the entirety of WCS, because I was against region locking as well, and I said it in one article, and Blizzard wasn't particularly excited with me saying this in an article, despite me being an official voice for the broadcast. Now critiquing esports is very different. Like, I do a lot of PUBG, and whenever I don't like something, I'm tweeting it out. Like, guys, this is bad and this is why. You should do it differently. But back then, no, it felt very controlled to critique stuff like that. But what WCS was, up until 2012 in StarCraft, we had a tournament every weekend. It was an MLG, it was a DreamHack, it was an Intel Extreme Masters, and stuff like that. And then coming through 2012 into 2013, Blizzard wanted control. Blizzard wanted control of the circuit, and they wanted to call it the WCS. And that was, as Thorin mentioned before, kind of the regions setting up WCS Europe, WCS America, and as Monty was on about, WCS Korea, which, as you say, was controlled by GSL and OSL, which created some...
Because OGN wanted a piece of that sweet, sweet pie, basically. And Blizzard wanted to give it to them because OGN had better reach because they had a television station, which GOM TV didn't have. And this was kind of...
Kesper and all that jazz that you need.
And probably corruption, if we're being honest. But...
the Kesper Mafia was real as fuck. Yeah.
Also with OGN. Let's not... I love me some OGN. I miss OGN. I love working there. Let's not pretend it wasn't corrupt. Anyway. Basically in that intermediate period where streaming was like on the up, having the TV station, as dumb as it sounds, was still important because many people at that time still watched OGN on TV. So having the additional reach for StarCraft was seen as valuable by Blizzard.
Yeah, makes sense. Blizzard was giving a lot of money to each of these regions to make this happen, right? They were very much all in on making this happen and stuff like that. It definitely went through different iterations as time went on. I think that first year especially actually was kind of my favorite year out of it all, because in Europe especially, because we're such a weird place compared to just an Americas or Korea, in Europe you had WCS Netherlands, WCS Germany, WCS France, all of this stuff going on, and all culminated in a really lovely tournament, which was WCS Europe, and we did it in is it called the Avicii Arena now? Did they change the name in Sweden?
From the Global. Yeah, I think it's the Avicii Arena.
Yeah. And 2012 we did there.
It was mega, mate. It's one of the best events ever for real.
Yes, thank you. I was buzzing doing that gig. That was lovely. And
speaking of which, by the way, to tie into the life one, that's the one where people might know the story. Famously, Stefano came from America where he was with like EG. Yep. He hadn't practiced. He didn't have his own keyboard, and they just rocked up, won the event. And he ready, Monty, because he was a fucking G. He beat Vortex, which was the brother of Lucifron, the like Zerg player from Spain. Right. And even though in Warcraft they used to be practice partners, in the interviews he was like, "Who is this kid?" or something. I've never heard of him, because that's the level of swag Stefano was on.
It was kind of wild. I will admit. And then we all danced Gangnam Style on the stage, and there's some interesting pictures of that.
That probably hasn't aged well, I imagine. That probably hasn't aged too well, the Gangnam Style part.
Didn't include it in my wedding display, I'll tell you that much. But no, and then we went through different iterations where it was just Europe and then just, the Americans and stuff like that. And that's where the region locking came into a problem, because what would happen was, yes, your big dick Koreans were able to win Korea, but your legends that were kind of winding down, like an MVP, who even to this day, I think some people would still consider him in the conversation of GOAT, even though that's really not true anymore because the level's so much higher and stuff like that. But he came along, and he was winding down. He had some problems with his hands because StarCraft is obviously very taxing on your hands compared to other video games. And he would just come and win, and then he'd bugger off. Yep. It was nice having MVP there. Don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed casting MVP, but they just bugger off. And that caused some problems, some frictions, and some contention that we were talking about before.
And then didn't they force the players to like live in that region or declare for that region? What he's saying
is then it became like, what's the exact loophole, right? How many days do I have to be there?
Yeah, exactly.
And the problem with this system was people were always going to gamify it, unfortunately, and so everyone just found the loopholes. Or like the joke was, it then gave bizarre advantages, like for example to Paul, because he already had a visa to go to school in America, so then he could play and he was awesome. But then he was way better than like the fucking NA players. Yeah, so it just the problem with it is that again, like a lot of things in the world, the idea was a great idea, sounded amazing, very utopian. The practice and how it was applied maybe was a bit scuffed, unfortunately.
I want to do a test, right? I'm going to say a name, and have you ever heard of this name? Pig Baby.
I have, but I'm a nerd, but it's very relevant. But he was a relevant player in NA, you're right. Yes.
He won a WCS America, right? And if you... this guy was like not tier 3. He was definitely a tier 2 Korean, but like he would be able to qualify for a GSL, but really not get very far at all. So that was the level of disparity we had. Now, of course, as you say, we all had a lot of contention about like region lock, and Blizzard didn't like that at all. However, if they didn't instigate that, I don't think you produce where a Cyril is now, or eventually you get these kids like Clem currently, who is our current world champion. I don't think someone like that is inspired those 6, 7, 8 years ago to then become this good. Because they're just getting dunked on.
Well, I mean, I'll give you the example, Kaelaris.
Yeah,
I do remember the first year of WCS, so before it had been fully had a chance to run, was the one where I was mates with Nanawa, and famously, he actually qualified to BlizzCon. He was the only non-Korean, and he just lost in the first round. There was 15 Koreans and Nanawa. So that's what the scene was becoming, unfortunately, at the end of the Open. You're right, it would have just been all Koreans.
Yes.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, is that the contrary point to that, Kaelaris, is like, okay, I hear you, but at the same time, if we didn't have WCS, would the Korean scene not have collapsed, and maybe the Kespa teams don't pull out and the Korean scene is healthier, right? Because the opposite side of the coin is this, which is that I think the great tragedy of WCS was that the prestigious tournaments, the GSL and the OSL, the legendary Brood War, the most prestigious Brood War tournament, and then you have the GSL, the most prestigious StarCraft 2 tournament, are basically just given regional title status at that point in time, whereas they used to be the most important events in the entire fucking world, right? And when you slap the WCS Korea on top of it, it just they're like, wait, is this not important anymore? It just feels really bad to people who are long-term fans of those tournaments. And, it is also just not indicative of, because nothing changed really about the skill needed to win those events, right? It just became this feeder tournament into the WCS international events, which those players would end up inevitably winning anyway. So it just feels bad to undermine a decade of history. It's especially with the OSL at this point in time to accomplish this goal, which was lame.
I can address this very succinctly and very quickly, and the idea of that is yes, absolutely. WCS kind of Should Blizzard have ever taken that on? But then, to that extent, has Blizzard ever handled an esport correctly?
No.
Ever.
That's a good line. That's a hell of a line.
Yeah, correct.
Well, it's okay. It's okay, Kaelaris, because now they're owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft has a great history also of handling esports well. So don't worry about it. They've combined their powers
by the way,
into
he doesn't
never
just say
handling esports correctly.
He also worked in Heroes of the Storm, which was a scene which came and went that Blizzard ran. So it's multiple games.
Which
James was on
ground. Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say James was on the Heroes of the Storm desk where I torpedoed my career with Activision Blizzard because
every one of your deaths is that?
Yeah.
You're the Grim Reaper. That when you show up, you better fucking look for a new game.
That was the one. I don't know if you remember it, but it was the one where DreamHack had put me on Heroes of the Storm for the first time ever, basically double dipping. So they were like, "Look, we've got you here for StarCraft. You do Heroes of the Storm." And when it went to the draft of the heroes. Remember they had to use a separate website. They hadn't built a draft into the game. And I think it was James and Todd, and they said we're going over to the draft now, and I was going, what do you mean? And they went, well, it's on that monitor over there, Richard. It's it's on a separate website. And I went, what? They haven't got a draft in a MOBA game built into the game? I went, that's fucking stupid.
Just like they didn't have an observing system in Hearthstone at the beginning, so you had to have two screens kind of overlaid with one another. But the point is that yes, Heroes of the Storm was basically, they admitted later on down the line, it was a testing bed. Even the Heroes League that they were doing was a testing bed for Overwatch. So they were just actively torpedoing that as time went on, just as a testing thing for Overwatch, which is crazy to think about. But, and I mean, all of these people since for Blizzard esports are all gone now. But even back then, obviously you got to hold your tongue. Clearly what happened with me kind of spouting about region lock and how I think that cost me a BlizzCon back then, I couldn't say that I think all of the decision-making was incompetent at the time. But I did feel that way, and as years have gone on with all of these other esports, they've never handled them properly. It's like a block. What have they handled properly? And don't get started on Overwatch League, but
I mean, not only have they not handled it properly, they went through a very Riot-esque phase at the start when StarCraft 2 got popular in the West. They were essentially alluding to the fact that they had essentially founded esports as a concept, which isn't true. And ultimately, as we've already talked about, the perfect storm that happened in South Korea for all of those things to rise and be successful, it was a confluence of circumstance, and critically, had nothing to do with Blizzard. Couldn't have had less to do with Blizzard. They had no influence in the country whatsoever over what was happening in their game. And they tried to retcon history.
By the way, the joke is if they had have known what was happening, they'd have made it so you couldn't crack the game, which means there never would have been the esport.
They'd have shut it down.
It's sort of good that they just didn't know what was going on in the corner over here,
Yep. Correct. But also as well, to the point about them not handling any esports correctly. They took the most successful esport of all time, at that moment in time before the rise of League of Legends. They essentially did things to it that actually made it contract and become less popular.
And by the way, they did this before League of Legends implemented the LCS or any of their regional leagues.
All pre-LCS.
So it wasn't like they were trying to copy Riot. They literally invented this themselves and then did it before Riot could do it.
Then
which happened in the same studios, by the way, in Germany. Exactly the same building.
Then when League of Legends got insanely popular, they were like, well, it's fine. We're Activision Blizzard, right? So we'll make our own MOBA. They were so late to the MOBA party. Like, keep in mind, we'd already had Heroes of Newerth come and go, because that was like the Dota 2 waiting. That was the Dota 2 waiting lobby, essentially. Then you had, obviously, Dota 2 was starting to rise up in like 2012. League of Legends, LCS. They were so late to, like. By the way, and a bunch of other shit.
They had like
the one that had the League World Championship, the Season 1 Championship, Monty, 2011 DreamHack. I worked that still at SK Gaming, and at the time there was something like 5 MOBA tournaments. As in, I didn't even follow MOBA. Like, the joke is, we had a player on one of our teams who was in like Heroes of Avalon, and I kept asking him how he was doing in like the fucking Heroes of Newerth tournament. He's like, "That's not my game," and I was like, "Listen, mate, I see
guys, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a DC Comics MOBA called Infinite Crisis.
Infinite Crisis, yep.
Well, studio,
Christina Alejandre at E-League was involved in making that game, so I used to hear about Infinite Crisis. Hey, nothing wrong with E-League. So there was all these MOBAs. So anyway, Activision Blizzard came late to that party. They wanted to make. I remember talking to let's say nameless devs, because I used to get invited to all the Activision Blizzard parties because of my work with StarCraft, and they were telling me the game was coming out. And what they wanted to do was they were like, we want a MOBA that's going to be focused on a team, not individual play like all the others. We want to make a game where it's like nobody can snowball and and also we want it so it's going to be very org friendly. We want to work with the orgs, so it's like, you're a fan of SK, you're not a fan of like, a faker or whatever it might be. And I was like, that's shit. That's not why people watch MOBAs for. People like it when one player has an individual level of skill that's far greater than everyone else. That was step 1 towards the end of my Activision Blizzard career. Step 2 being the thing that happened on the desk with James. They fuck up Heroes of the Storm so badly that I was pretty much dead on arrival. Like, I want to say, as an S-tier esport, it just was living in the shadow of better games. And then, as James rightly says, they started doing a bunch of shit to it at the end, which was contrary to its own survival, because they were like, we're definitely going to get it right next time. Meanwhile, they also had the most popular game on Twitch for a time in the form of like Hearthstone. Everyone was like watching and playing that. Left out fundamental things, like no replay system, etc. They ended up fucking up their own tournaments there as well.
They also on Hearthstone had an internal fight among the devs, because some of the devs wanted to make it a very competitive game and the other devs wanted to make it a very casual game, so they like split the difference weirdly, and it ended up in post-release, the subsequent sets of Hearthstone, like the casuals devs ended up winning, which I think took a lot of the wind out of the competitive gaming sales.
Yeah, and then, they fucked all that up and then went into the Overwatch League. And the reason why I wanted to make this point, not just to tack on to what James was saying, the reality is StarCraft 2 essentially turbocharged esports. Yes, again, confluence of circumstance in the West, because it's the rise of YouTube, it's the rise of streaming platforms. Yep, Twitch in particular helped make it. But not only that, just general appetite for what esports could be. We'd also come out of the global recession by this time, so there was money to spend, marketing budgets were back, people were willing to promote things again. But then with the Overwatch League, they've essentially killed modern esports as we know it. Like, all things that will never happen again. No one will ever pay a fortune for broadcasting rights ever again. That $90 million deal, saying it out loud, $90 million for 2 years of exclusivity on the Overwatch League. I still can't believe that happened. Like, I always think I'm getting the number wrong. It must be wrong. It must be 9 million.
I mean, you got to hand it to Bobby Kotick. That was a hell of a negotiating job he did.
Yeah, listen, the call was coming from inside the house over at Twitch. Let's just put it that way. But so that's never going to happen again. The franchise model utterly dead.
The joke is they pay you to have a team now.
Will never happen again. Yeah, exactly. and so ultimately, like it's so strange to see what Activision Blizzard have done to the fabric of esports ultimately, because back when StarCraft 2 was on the come up, it really felt like it was ahead of its time. And to where Overwatch League, which was like completely artificial, and now ultimately we're gonna feel the impact of the failure of the Overwatch League for another decade at least.
No, I totally agree. And to bring it back to StarCraft here for a moment on the second, this is why it feels like mislaid eggs in turned over baskets everywhere else, because like. You had StarCraft 2, and technically you still have StarCraft 2, and which game has just ticked along, got big prize pools, didn't even need Blizzard in these past couple of years other than to give us patches, which we have some bugs currently, and progress with them takes a long time, but like, we have been going 15 years, and this is where a lot of StarCraft's community harbors the true animal.
By the way, Brood War has not been patched since 99. No, 2001. I think it was 2001 was the last patch for Brood War. But it hasn't been patched in like 25 years, guys, and the game is still going.
Correct. We for StarCraft 2, we actually get community written patches, which then get implemented by one guy at Blizzard. just so we're
shout
aware.
out one guy.
But
I like the way you've given like the fucking a post-apocalyptic dystopia where there's one guy can work the machine still, and he gets up and it keeps society functioning, but everyone else doesn't know he's the cog that keeps the whole machinery. I love it.
In that is the meme in StarCraft 2. We have one intern who's doing he's been doing it for 4 years, bless him. But anyway, the thing is that we feel this abandonment despite us ticking alongside started project into failed project into here Hearthstone esports into all of these games buggering off to YouTube, and thank God StarCraft wasn't included in that deal where all their games went to YouTube, because that was the death knell for things like Hearthstone as well, in terms of their competitive scene for quite a long time. Overwatch League comes along, Overwatch League disappears. Yes, currently it's being handled by Faceit, but StarCraft's still plodding along. I do think that if there was even just an ounce of interest from Blizzard's side of things, where it's like, you give us a fraction of what you had invested in these failed projects down the line, and StarCraft 2 continues to tick along and do well for itself off the back of what is community-driven projects in a lot of instances. And we were kind of really at the mercy of EWC this year, as you guys were alluding to at the very beginning with those 8-month period where I don't quite think, obviously you guys have been a bit out of it, right? That 8-month period in the StarCraft scene was agonizing. And I don't think EWC even wanted for StarCraft to be the last game on that announcement. But I think all the community sentiment from Twitter and all the stuff eventually was able to get it. I don't know that for sure. Could have been just their way to do it. But yeah. So I think Blizzard could even still step in and give us some money, which again doesn't cost anywhere near as much as other games. They could still, but I don't think they will.
Well, they don't even. Again, it's just classic. Like, this is Activision Blizzard in a nutshell, and I'm always calling them Activision Blizzard. You will notice quite specifically because the Blizzard sentiment, what Blizzard was, that's just dead. You know, these are the people that used to like send me like fucking little cool trinkets and memorabilia just for like working as a host or a journalist. Yeah, right. Now they curse my name, but they've never really cherished or looked after the people that have like essentially.
I will disagree with that. I think that there, like, especially Mike Morhaime has cared a lot about esports and has been really focused on esports even after Activision acquisition. And Mike has made many efforts with me and other casters to, before I did Overwatch League, when I was doing StarCraft and stuff like that, to like give you the time of day, take you out to dinner. Like, he really cared, I think. And I think that the OG Blizzard crew, like Mike Morheim, were definitely still very passionate and very grassroots about esports.
Sure, but he hasn't been there for like 6 years.
Sure. No, I'm just saying that there was a long time where I do think that was true, even after Activision bought them.
I mean, just as a tangent, Mike still cares about this, even just the StarCraft guys. We were literally on a call with him like 2 weeks ago, looking at all of his Dreamhaven projects, right? Like, so he even still cares about the StarCraft esports guys, but obviously no influence when it comes to Blizzard.
But so I think that the care that was there in the beginning was still there for a long time with Blizzard. And I think that's why many of us liked Blizzard, is because they gave a fuck in a way that other esports companies didn't. Like, the difference in treatment for me between Blizzard when I was doing StarCraft simultaneously to League of Legends and my experience with Riot was crazy. It was crazy different.
Sure. It used to be like that, but I would go so far as to say, for whatever reason, whether it was like Mike was working on other stuff or whatever, there was a level of consideration that just wasn't there from like 2015 onwards.
That's fair.
So he was still at the company, and it was like people acutely felt it. There was like a sea change, like towards the end of, well, not the end again, but towards when WCS made all of its major changes and they started dispensing the ranking points and things like that. You never saw any of the OG Blizzard people, like, when all of this was happening. It was always someone that had been at the company for a comparatively short period of time. I mean, everyone comparatively short to Mike because he fucking founded the thing. But, yeah.
To interject for a second,
please do.
Whilst I said prior that, yes, there were a lot of decisions that were being made that just across the board were, I don't think, correct and quite incompetent about the direction of things like that, I can't argue with Monty in the case of there was definitely people there, and a lot of the people in the esports scene there as well, that really did care. And to compare my treatment with them to, I guess, maybe the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, even in like talent management is a lost art now. Like, for example, they have no clue what talent need anymore. You'd be surprised if you go into a talent room and you've even got like a snacks table and some water anymore. Like, sometimes you just get put in a box and you're just like, well, what's going on here? But they definitely cared. And it was actually some of the best treatment of staff, casters, players, all of this stuff that I experienced in my whole career, I would say, actually. Yeah. Not to say that there weren't other moments in these other games, like PUBG, of course, and stuff, but...
Today's episode of The Four Horsemen is brought to you by Ridge. Now, what is Ridge? They make some delightful, if unconventional, wallets. Now, if you've had to buy yourself a new leather wallet every few years, if it's absolutely stuffed and bulging in your pocket, you may consider Ridge here. As you can see, Ridge has a money strap on the back just to hold some bills, and it can hold up to 12 cards. All you have to do to get your cards out is pop it out right here. Mine's made of carbon fiber, and these things are virtually indestructible and come with a lifetime warranty. They're modern, they're slim, they have over 50 colors and styles to choose from. They have that lifetime warranty that I talked about. It's the last wallet you'll ever have to buy. And they have RFID blocking technology for security. So very easy, guys. You can head on over for a limited time. Our listeners get 10% off at Ridge by using code HORSEMAN. That's MAN singular at checkout. Just head to ridge.com and use code HORSEMAN and you're all set. After purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them the Four Horsemen sent you. Upgrade for the rest of your life to a nice Ridge wallet today. So, Kaelaris, as we move on, can you talk about kind of the fading of WCS and the systems that started to pop up to replace WCS when that framework went away in StarCraft? Because that leads us into more or less where we are now.
Sure. So, obviously, actually, WCS existed for quite a while in different iterations, one or another, and things like that. Did certainly wane, and eventually Blizzard did want to pull out of the idea of, supporting all of that in a direct sense. so kind of handed it off to ESL to be able to do things, which kind of turned into what was the EPT, which is what CS went under the name of as well for a while. The ESL Pro Tour, correct?
Mm. It was something. What was it? Was it the Pro Tour? Probably. I don't know. Yeah.
The ESL Pro Tour. So basically, Blizzard had handed off. Is this the kind of period of time you're kind of getting at, Monty, or before this? What?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, yeah. So we were a little bit concerned, of course, with Blizzard saying, okay, we're going to take a step back and things like that. However, what was great in that period of time was Blizzard was clearly keen on the idea of like still sustainability to a degree. So they signed a 3-year contract with ESL, which is brilliant because if it's 1 year, you know, you're going to have the same. If it's 1 year, then 1 year, then 1 year, people are uncertain. You're not going to have any new blood coming in because, like, if it's only 1 year, you don't know if there's promise of me being able to catch up in just 1 year alone to your Serals, your Marus, and all of this stuff, right? It's impossible. But 3 years really gave people an opportunity to try and go for that kind of catch up, and that's where a name like Clem comes in. But under ESL's banner with the EPT, where it was, I think that it was a very not too dissimilar a circuit from EWC as a whole, but it tried to harken back on what it was before, which was like more regional based. We ended up at DreamHacks, we ended up at the Intel Extreme Masters, even though the Intel Extreme Masters actually proliferated through every single year anyway, was part of the WCS circuit, became the actual official World Championship after we would always do an Intel Extreme Masters Katowice World Championship, despite BlizzCon happening at the same time, and every year Katowice was always better than BlizzCon, so that always created this weird dynamic for a long time. So I guess that's where I'll stop if you want, Monty, because that's kind of that EPT era, which lasted until 2023, I think.
Well, you keep going. So after the EPT era ends, what's the next result? Because I think, you know, it's the last couple of years that there's been more uncertainty because the GSL continued to run throughout this time period. And then EWC comes and people are, you know, it gets announced as one of the games. And one of the things that happened, remember, we talked about how the KESPA teams, so the KTs, the SKTs, these teams start to pull out. And so what happens is one of the good things about EWC is that they say StarCraft's an official game at this event. So what happens is all the teams around the world, like Vitality, you know, all these teams that didn't have StarCraft players before, start to pick up StarCraft players now. And indeed, many of the prominent StarCraft 2 players are on teams like Falcons at the current point in time. So in order to compete in EWC, teams start to field StarCraft players and start to sign them, which kind of at least somewhat fills the void that was left by these major Korean orgs leaving.
Yeah, so I guess StarCraft 2 resided upon its like heritage and lineage, right? Like even before EWC, there was Gamers 8, which was kind of the precursor to what they wanted to do with EWC. And we were one of the games at Gamers 8. We did qualifiers in certain locations, and then we did it there. And obviously we just assumed, well, from that point on, we're StarCraft 2, you know, they appreciate the lineage and all of this stuff. And we obviously did EWC last year. We're doing EWC this year as well. And you're right in terms of the players like, or teams, I should say, like Vitality. I'm trying to think. I could even just get a list up now that I think about it. Because you're right. I mean, a lot of big orgs have signed StarCraft 2 players. However, I'm surprised you didn't have even more signing StarCraft 2 players, because it might very well be the cheapest EWC Club Championship points you could ever buy in a very legitimate esport that, you know, nobody's going to shake two bones at. Everybody's going to be like, a StarCraft 2 player, makes sense. Although, actually, as a slight tangent, I will say, I do think when you go to other people and say, I'm a StarCraft 2 guy, I do think that's lost quite a bit of punch compared to where it used to be. There was like 5 or 6 years ago when I would do another game or something like that. I'd go to PUBG or whatever and say, "Hi, I'm Kaelaris. I've done StarCraft 2 for a long time." Everybody would be like, "Ooh, very respectful," and stuff like that. If you say that in now's year, I do think it's lost a bit of punch because just time has gone on. But anyway, so what players do we actually have at the moment? So we have a few from Vitality. As you say, we have Falcons. Rogue has just qualified from Falcons. Of course, we have Basilisk, which is the one team that has kind of just prevailed from StarCraft 2. It's kind of that scene only because it's Serral and those guys. So Serral's not going anywhere. He'll stay at Basilisk. But Twisted Minds, even Sentinels came in, actually, which was a bit of a surprise to me and picked up Showtime. Virtus Pro picked up Classic. And obviously Team Liquid has been forever StarCraft. So nobody's ever going to begrudge Team Liquid of picking up players for EWC with, of course, Clem the world champion at the moment.
Talon as well, right? They
picked up Dark last year.
Yeah.
However, Dark had to do military service and also had a kid. So he's
that's
unable
GG, no re, as they say in the business. Yeah.
But he went very far, right? Like he was a great pickup for Talon.
He was top 4 at the esports World Cup, I think.
So that's kind of the state of it. And as I mentioned before, we did have a match fixing scandal with one of our Chinese players who we were concerned that there wasn't actually going to be any ramifications for, and if EWC was actually going to make a stance against that, because it was just an accusation by another Chinese player that basically there was match fixing with this guy. Basically, another StarCraft 2 player who you might remember the name of, Jim, basically just said, I'm a raging alcoholic and I'm a raging gambler and I've done all this stuff and this guy did it with me. So, and he was like, oh,
gotta love that. Got to love that.
So I mean, that kind of gets us. That gets us into the current era, and the reason why I think it's important to have this particular show right now is that for the first time in 15 years, there has been some uncertainty about the competitive state of StarCraft 2. And the reason why this came up was that, so the ESL Pro Tour in 23 to 24 ended with Codas Season 2 of 2024, which ended June 29th of 2024. And GSL just came back at the beginning of May, and it ran for 1 week. And nobody knew it was going to happen at the start of this year. The people like Tasteless and was making videos saying, I don't know if GSL is going to happen.
Nobody knew it was going to happen a month before it happened.
Yes.
Basically, like it was as bad as that.
And to put this in context, so in the very early days of GSL, so before the WCS circuit, I think there would probably be, if I'm remembering this off the top of my head, maybe 5 or 6 GSL seasons a year, and they were about a month long or so each. There were a lot, and what happened is when the circuit got standardized, they had to conform to the seasons that were going on. And then you got maybe I think 3 seasons plus some other little events scattered in there. And they were each about 2 months long. And this kind of continued with the ESL Pro Tour circuit. So you have these GSL events that last, 6, 7, 8 weeks. And then all of a sudden we come to this GSL, which lasts 9 days.
And first place is $7,000. So we're almost back to MLG's fucking 15 years ago at this point in time.
Which most has been crowdfunded since 2023, interestingly. And I think they would usually get upwards of maybe $11,000, $12,000 a month on Patreon, and now it's down to $5,000 because obviously our 2 GSLs that happened 1 week off, then 1 week are done, and nobody knows if it's ever going to come back again because we're left in limbo again.
It took a year. Basically, it took almost a year between GSLs, which has never happened before in the history of GSL.
No, the StarCraft scene for those 8 months was truly at the mercy of the EWC announcement, and obviously we finished EWC at the end, let's say August last year, and none of us knew. And me and all the other commentators, a lot of the players were constantly getting asked, you guys must know something, surely. You guys must know something. And normally I'd be able to, with the network I've built over time, I'd be asking people at EFG, I'd be asking, all these people hey, what's going on, man? Very tight lips everywhere. So for 8 months, not only did the community not know, but all the insiders, we did not know either. We had no clue what was going to happen. I think a lot of StarCraft commentators and all that other stuff started, streaming other games, enjoying other games, looking for other things. What else were we going to do? Because you just didn't even know it was going to come back. And it wasn't just the EPT, which doesn't exist in that form anymore. It was just, they just basically said that EWC is going to handle the qualifiers for, like, they did one in DreamHack Dallas. They're doing ones online. The
GSL was a qualifier for EWC also.
Yes, but all of those parts, including the GSL, like if EWC hadn't said StarCraft's the last game, those GSLs wouldn't have occurred. Those qualifiers obviously wouldn't have occurred because there was no need, so it wouldn't have been at DreamHack and things like that. And the DreamHack Americas ones really surprised me more than anything, because every time in the last 2 years we did a Dallas and we did an Atlanta, the crowds for StarCraft 2 there were huge, to the point where not that there was a CS major going on or something like that, but there was always a CS tournament going on next to us. There was people stealing seats for StarCraft from the CS stage and just, dragging them over because our crowd was so packed relatively. So I'm bemused that there was no oomph, no interest in continuing those on in some proper capacity, because there was a $50,000 qualifier there, but no casting on site. It was 2 people online.
Well, I think part of this is probably because of the Microsoft buyout of Activision Blizzard, right? And there was so much uncertainty that during this time period that it probably was hard for Blizzard to re-up on the ESL Pro Tour circuit if they were going to put money in. You know what I mean?
Things move slow in a buyout.
Well, I mean, their budgets were probably just frozen,
Probably, maybe. Well, I mean, there is actually... There is... in the StarCraft community, there's quite a lot of people that see the Microsoft buyout as maybe eventually a blessing, but not during a buyout process. Nothing moves during a buyout process. But people assume, or people think in the StarCraft community, that maybe, the way in which Microsoft continues to help out Age of Empires 2
Halo,
or gives money to... What's that? I don't know anything about Halo.
They do keep throwing money at Halo, to be fair. They do that.
I guess there's a lot of players of Halo, though, on consoles, right? Still, even, maybe.
Maybe.
Anyway, but for, like, Age of Empires 4 still has tournaments and things like that, so people were thinking to themselves, maybe Microsoft might kick them in the butt and say, hey, you've got to give something to StarCraft. Because the funny thing is almost every time they turn up and talk about games for Microsoft, they've always got bloody StarCraft 2 shirts on now. Like James Rayner t-shirts on or Tychus shirts on and all this stuff. So somebody there likes it. And we're just hoping... There's a lot of copium guys in StarCraft 2 that are looking for any little kind of, nugget of, to be able to wander you down the path to say, maybe this is the time. Maybe somebody's going to give us some support to see if something will happen beyond our efforts in the community.
But
I mean, that's definitely wishful thinking. I mean, the way Microsoft kind of conceptualize esports is they like to do one big thing. And that's pretty much how they approach it. They don't like circuits or regular stuff. They just like to have a spectacle, like a one-off kind of thing. That's like pretty much their approach to Halo once they started bringing it back in-house again. And yeah, I mean, look, I'd love that to be true. I also think there might be, like, I've listened to executives that have been talking about, like, how excited they are since the takeover happened, and it doesn't sound like they barely bring up the IP. You know what I mean? They barely bring up the Blizzard catalog. Yeah. They really don't talk about it a lot.
They've been licensing. The thing is, they've been licensing the StarCraft IP quite a bit recently, which is interesting.
Trying in Korea, right?
Yeah.
There was bidders between either NCSoft, Next.
No. I mean, they're like they're making like the tabletop miniatures game. They're licensing it to other companies to make things.
That's
which
hilarious.
I think is
They're making a Games Workshop style tabletop game.
I believe they are. Yes.
Games Workshop. That's right. We really have come full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so ready. Guys, I'm so ready. Okay.
By the way,
I got my brushes
still
right
technically
here.
the biggest fumble ever in esports actually is Games Workshop not letting it be Warhammer 40k and it became StarCraft. That might that's one of those ones where like you go back in time and just do that over, mate. You know.
Well, it was actually Warcraft 1 that was supposed to be Warhammer, the original Warhammer, and then they made it
Warcraft.
wasn't, and then they made 40k. They made StarCraft, but that was not supposed to be Warcraft 40k. It was just supposed to be Warcraft.
But it is though.
The Warhammer initially.
It is though. Like they can't.
Yeah, sure it is.
Anyone got
Yeah,
shares
it
in
is.
Games Workshop?
But
Anyone got shares in Games Workshop? No.
No. Although I probably should have. I've given all the fucking money they've had off me down the years. So,
so what's interesting is that now we're at this point where during this period of uncertainty, where they were like, is there going to be a professional StarCraft circuit? Tasteless and State and the guys in Korea, they stepped up and they created the RSL, which is the Revival StarCraft League, which I was watching tonight, and they've got a little studio that they're working out of. State and Tasteless, like it looks good, and they've got the professional players in Korea in this tournament. They've crowdfunded it. They're paying out prize pools that certainly are not huge, but are equivalent to other cups that are going on in StarCraft 2 right now. And this is where the community has kind of picked up the torch again. And it feels somewhat similar to where StarCraft started in a way. Hey guys, the Four Horsemen is brought to you, of course, by Turtle Beach, who make some of the finest headsets you can find anywhere. I'm wearing the Stealth 700 Gen 3s. They are extremely comfortable, very well constructed, and best of all, feature some really groundbreaking technology, such as the ability to listen over USB wireless connection and Bluetooth at the same time. That means that you can listen to the Four Horsemen or other LFN podcasts or music or have a Discord call with your friends while connected to your PC or your PlayStation or your Xbox, and you can independently control the volume on each of the ear cups. These are fantastic audio quality. Of course, you don't have to take my word for it. Look up reviews of the Stealth 700 Gen 3s, and you will see a bunch of audio files saying that these, for the price, basically can't be beat. Turtle Beach is fantastic. I also use the Cone 2 mouse. If you guys have heard of Roccat, they actually bought Roccat, so you can go ahead and get many of the same Roccat products. They have a new leverless fight controller. If you are part of the FGC or enthusiastic about fighting games, they have flight simulation, driving simulation, joysticks, and wheels. They've got absolutely everything. You can head to turtlebeach.com and use code HORSEMAN, that's MAN singular, Horseman, for 10% off your entire order. That's 10% off your order at turtlebeach.com with promo code HORSEMAN. After your purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we here at the Four Horsemen sent you. Get the ultimate immersive gaming experience with Turtle Beach today.
So there's a few things to address about the RSL and then all the other community things that are going on, right? So for example, if you went on Liquipedia for StarCraft right now and looked at ongoing, upcoming, as well as finished, right? And look at the time period and how much is going on right now. You would just want to do that. It is ridiculous how much community stuff is always going on in StarCraft 2 and has been going on like that for 10 years. And it never ends because our community just loves this game. They are voracious for this game. So that is one thing that does exist. So in terms of what would happen if we had no circuit, which, by the way, is a very real possibility at the end of this year or after EWC in these next 2 months, because you say that, but like you say, with other, with the crowds and everything like that, there's also a rising number of tournament operators that are coming back into the space. Like PGL keeps getting bigger, Star Ladder's coming back, Blast is expanding. Like, I think somebody's going to do something with this at some point in time. So? Why not? It'd be nice. I don't know if it's going to be the case, but it would be nice. So there are other like smaller lands that have cropped up recently. There was one in Bulgaria called Stara Zagora, which seemed quite successful for itself. I think it was maybe a $10,000 tournament or something like that. Cheesadelphia just happened. There's some other rumored ones on the horizon, which I'm not going to say because, you know, I'd be stealing some people's thunder and stuff like that. But there are some things in the pipeline, basically. Obviously, Home Story Cup, as you guys were mentioning as well, and they just love it. So they've been doing, I think it's number 27 that's coming up this week.
That's crazy.
By the
Home
way,
Story Cup's
you
always
could
been
actually
good.
use Home Story Cup as the parallel for how the scene didn't die out, because the joke is, like you thought, Monty, it had just finished, and they don't. No, the joke is it became bigger, and eventually wasn't even in the guy's fucking house anymore. He had like a venue nearby or something, right? Kaelaris.
Yeah,
Like it went from literally being his house to like actually like it got way bigger even, yeah, and had like proper audience that weren't just the other players and stuff. No, it got huge.
The Home Story Cup 1 was him in a tiny apartment, and then, you know, one or two of them happened there, and then they suddenly moved to this bigger apartment, and then after that we moved into this bar which has got downstairs area, all of this. It's definitely grown.
It must be said, it is still in Krefeld though, so, you know.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Richard, that's actually,
is
if
awful.
anything, that's the joke that actually highlights how stupid Western esports is. Western esports is about making no money and having no future runway, but holding it in a massive arena and going, this is real, I am LARPing, it's real. The real logical thing you'd do is host it somewhere really cheap where you can actually manage all the margins and have a sustainable business. That's actually, even though you mean it as a joke, that sort of is like you're almost like revealing the fakeness of Western esports. Now it's a LARP.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it is. It is a LARP. And by the way, those Take TV events are like, they were hugely influential, not just for like, you know, StarCraft and how we do things. It's actually, they were hugely influential for esports in general. You know, a lot of people attribute, you know, Beyond the Summit.
Beyond the Summit, 100%.
They think they invented it. Yes, absolutely.
It's like the Take TV, the Home Story Cups. They were special.
So, hold up. Let me explain this, guys, because if you don't know, if you never saw Beyond the Summit or you don't know Home Story Cup, the reason why this started was that in like whatever, what was the first Home Story Cup? 2010, I'm guessing, off the top of my head.
Very early on.
Yeah, it was very early on.
Very early.
In StarCraft 2.
It was literally just Dennis's house.
Yes, so it was one guy who set up his house as a broadcast. And what was fun about this is that commentators come out there and the players are doing commentary just on somebody's couch. And they're all playing this kind of not really that serious tournament against each other. And they're talking mad shit and they're drinking. And, you know, it's this like pure banter on the couch. Whoever's around just throws on a headset. So people just walk in and out all the time. It's really fun. And in 2010 or whenever this started, nobody had ever done anything like this. It was really, I think, pretty revolutionary of what we've seen a lot of streamers do and become. But this was, hey, let's take these pro players and let's really showcase their personalities and let's put them in an environment where they can just hop in and off the mic, and we'll get some, you know, hosts and commentators there as well to, you know, draw the best out of them and provide a little more commentary during downtime when the players aren't, you know, there spicing it up. And it really was a great product, and it's been going on forever now and is still great.
Yeah. I mean, and like I said, it influenced pretty much the broader approach to esports, because what it really highlighted, and this is why StarCraft in general is, whether you know it or not, StarCraft 2 is the most influential esport on how we create the product in Western esports. First, it's like you said, it highlighted so much of the personality of the players, and there were players that weren't particularly good, but they were able to justify being signed to a professional organization purely on personality alone. You know, I want to say, for example, like Bling, at Dignitas.
By the way,
his
literally
story,
in control, even though we all love him and he's passed away. He wasn't a very good StarCraft 2 player, but I'll tell you what, his personality more than made up for it, didn't it? So of course you want that guy in your team.
Absolutely.
Essentially the joke is, Idra did fuck all media. Like, you actually need in control to run the whole fucking sponsorship side, otherwise Idra doesn't get paid to play the game. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Idra also detested the fans and said as much, and I do believe
that was one of his endearing qualities, though.
Yeah, no, put it this way.
No, the joke was he was a wrestling heel, he just didn't know it.
Yeah, it blows.
We need more of him.
It blows my mind that, like, essentially he what cost him his contract was when he said that thing to a fan where he's like, "No, you're fucking stupid, and I get paid to tell you that, you stupid fuck," or something. And that was a huge drama that essentially torpedoed Idra, which is sort of crazy to think about.
Do you want to know the exact words?
Yes, please do. Please do.
It was when he said about David Kim, the lead balancer of StarCraft 2, that he would want to R-word him with a tire iron. There you go.
Okay, well. I remember it.
By the way, guys, that's just how StarCraft was. Like, you think about StarCraft as the nerdiest esport. Back in the day, people were saying outrageous shit.
Why it was so jarring if you didn't come organically from League of Legends to see how everyone was scared of Riot, because you were like, in the other games like this, they're basically telling like the developer to kill himself, and then they're going to the tournament next week. Like, what? Like, it was nuts how different the contrast was. It's why, by the way, without veering into this territory, let's just say you all know, if you're in CS, a couple of very big CS people went over to Valorant and had a bad time there because they didn't know what a Riot game is like versus the fucking Wild West Carnival Barker world of CS where you can do whatever you want. They thought, I'll just go and play hardball with Chestnut's Riot games. Like, it didn't work out, believe it or not.
Yeah. Weird how that one pans out. But obviously the other thing that it did, and obviously Take TV kind of did this as well, but it was the whole concept of having a team house and essentially having content factories. You know, that it wasn't financially sustainable for the organizations that did it. But I mean, obviously, quite famously, you know, Complexity, for instance, had like a really cool team house with, you know, really cool players. Evil Geniuses did it for a time. Root crowdfunded a team house, and it was like, you know, it wasn't sustainable then, but it's the type of thing you take for granted now that we just do. That was all revolutionary. That was like pioneering for that time in esports. And so it is kind of interesting to see so many people that paid lip service to like StarCraft 2 and acknowledge the importance and the impact it's had on the space. And now what you're left with, as always ends up the way as a esport runs through its lifetime, you're only left with the hardcore people now. Like the real ones are all there, all still there. All the names that I used to work with, you know, I haven't done a StarCraft event in years and years and years, obviously. They're all still there. They're all trucking away. Harstom's back to playing, I see. Playing for Shopify Rebellion, which is crazy. Yeah, you know, that's crazy. Love that guy. You know, and obviously the players might come and go, although there are some names I recognize and some that I don't. But all the commentators are still there. All the people that, like Kaelaris is talking about, genuinely love the game. They're still there. They're still working. They're still trying to make things happen. And it's kind of crazy that this has been going on in my blind spot. You know, I haven't paid a lot of attention to this.
It's also that they're in the same way that the fans are supporting the ever-loving shit out of these Brood War streamers. There are certain people who grew up in this era of esports who are supporting the players. I mean, Kaelaris mentioned it, but it's like Team Liquid is never not going to have StarCraft because they come from StarCraft, and because I think Victor would probably rather die than not have StarCraft players on Team Liquid's roster, whether it makes financial sense for Team Liquid or not. Shopify is another one. Like, people don't understand this, but Tobias, I think Lutka is his name, the CEO of Shopify, is a massive StarCraft fan. He formed his esports team because Shopify Rebellion. He made Shopify Rebellion because he's a StarCraft fan. I think he will always have StarCraft players, even if, sure, he's got an LCS team now, but the cost to support a few StarCraft players isn't that much, and that's what that guy's passion is, so it's just going to happen because he's super rich.
It goes further. I mean, he credits the success of Shopify to StarCraft 2. So there's no more bigger connection than that, right? Like, that's yeah, crazy.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, overall, like, again, this is a question for James. I mean, as somebody that worked in what a lot of us would consider the golden era of StarCraft 2, and obviously worked right the way through, and you know, you obviously work in multiple games in multiple roles. But what do you think of like StarCraft 2? Like, now, as somebody that obviously can go and work in that space, work a top tier tournament, how does it like compare and contrast?
compared to the golden age, working it now.
Again, I use that term loosely. A lot of people, like golden ages mean different things to different people, right? Like we might have a fondness for it based on the fact we were working and the people, etc. People watching it will obviously all have their favorites and stuff like that. Golden ages are sometimes very overrated. Like we use this term in Counter-Strike to talk about essentially 2015 to 2018, and it's the golden age. But actually, like the broadcast talent we have now, I think it stands tall if you were to compare it to the golden age. I think we're in a golden age of Counter-Strike broadcast now. It's just we can't call it that because we've already used golden age for that time period.
Right, yeah, I see. Yeah, I very rarely check into a Counter-Strike broadcast, but I do think your talent is better now than it was before, personally. But anyway, that's by the by in terms of the cast and stuff like that. The funny thing is about that is actually I think StarCraft talent as a whole, I think they are spectacular. But they just don't get their flowers on a bigger, grander scene. Like, for example, every time esports awards comes around, right? If you're not working CS, if you're not working League, if you're not working Dota, if you're not working COD, you don't get a shoe in. Despite some of the people that I would say in StarCraft, for example, they're some of the best talent out there. They'll just never be told it.
Agree with that.
It's obviously very different. For all the StarCraft talent or the StarCraft players and stuff like that, they've kind of moved to a bit more of a micro version of what was going on currently in the Brood War scene, with all these streamers becoming like, streamers and doing all this other like reality TV stuff going on in a more smaller sense in the Western world. Like all of them, like Roddy and Pig and all these people diversified themselves quite a lot from just doing StarCraft 2 commentary for like bigger tournaments, and now all just stream alongside it, stream other games, do smaller things, or like some of the players are all streaming and things like that. For me, it's a little bit different because, as you say, I'm going out and doing a PUBG or a PUBG mobile. I'm interested in Deadlock, maybe, if that is able to kind of spark off later on. So I'm still just kind of sat in I'm going to watch 3 tournaments at once, and I'm going to make notes, and I'm not a whole lot changed for me, basically, other than in StarCraft, all of my work somewhat diminished because all these tournaments went to, especially online qualifiers or all of
By the way,
things,
since you did do other games, you obviously do PUBG, you did Heroes of the Storm and stuff. Did you ever actually yourself have like moments where you were like, this might be the last StarCraft tournament, I've got to like do a hard pivot? Did you ever think it was over for you?
No. And I was of the opinion that a lot of people do esports retirements. I'm of the opinion that's possibly one of the stupidest things you could ever do, because why would you ever shut yourself off?
I mean, the joke is, even though it's not totally true, Kaelaris, Richard did one and he's working events again now, so I know what you mean. Not technically, but in a way.
To be fair, I did say if I ever come back, it'll be because I need them.
All right, fair enough. I didn't cover it. Okay.
Yeah. I was explicit.
No, I never felt that it was gonna be the last tournament, apart from maybe this EWC. I kind of felt it at the end of last one as well, because we had no clue, and I just assumed, maybe I think we were a bit more kind of like more optimistic about the transition from last EWC onwards. But as soon as that 8-month period hit of no news, nothing, I couldn't get blood out of a stone. It was impossible. And every angle I tried to find information, get things from, because we've been doing it 15 years. Surely someone in an 8-month period owed us a little bit of information.
It's pretty fucked up, honestly.
Thankfully for me, I was in a very stable position of like, I have these other games that I'm doing. I'm very much enjoying them. I only do games I enjoy. I don't go out there and just whore myself out to anything and just be the generic esports host, because I hate that shit. But for the other guys, for the guys that are only StarCraft, that 8 months was diabolical. And if it was kind of a problem of internally, be it Blizzard, EFG, EWC, having to try and come to a decision and things like that, we were told by the end of it, like, they didn't want to say anything to us to get our hopes up. But I do think 8 months for a scene like that, because it did hurt StarCraft in general, never mind the individual personalities behind the scene. I do think we needed some proper comms. in an 8-month period of time. Because 8 months in esports, guys,
Yeah.
that's an eternity. And things can change so heavily in an 8-month period. So that was definitely a struggle. But I think
it also, I think, crucially, like, breaks people's viewing habits too, where it's like, so if it comes back after 8 months, are the fans still going to be there? Because once you've moved on, I mean, we saw this in League of Legends recently with the LCS to the LTA transition, where they basically just nuked their own viewership, right? With the rebranding. And it's like, as soon as you break people of the habit, as soon as there isn't GSL to watch anymore, the question is, do they ever come back?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that was genuinely one of our concerns for a long time. Whilst that 8-month period was going on, a lot of things were ticking along, right? For example, before that 8-month period, when the EPT was a thing and EWC was going on and stuff like that, for example, every Monday, there was a weekly tournament for Europe, North America, and Korea. $400 every single time, funded by EPT or EWC or Blizzard, wherever that money came from. In that 8-month period, the community rallied, and those Monday weeklies that were cancelled after 300 episodes or whatever, or whatnot, me, Roddy, and Steadfast funded Europe for a while, $400 tournament per week. Then I think TKL and those guys took it over. In Americas, it was Pig, Ursa TV, Stegosaurus, or whatever. Those guys started funding it every single week. For the Korean Cups, Wardy started financing it every single week. So that never ended. For 8 months, weekly cups, and it's still going on now. They just kept going. It's not the same money in the grand scheme of the scene compared to having these big benefactors giving to a scene or having these stops and things like that. But the community money will never stop flowing because the people care so much.
Still must suck though if you're working as broadcast talent. Like also as well, the big thing for everyone was obviously getting invited to a BlizzCon. They're not having it this year, right?
BlizzCon has been very sporadic. Like basically since COVID, they've like canceled it a billion times.
Yeah, and StarCraft hasn't been at BlizzCon now because again, as you say, it was cancelled for COVID, and even for years before that, we weren't actually at BlizzCon. Our World Championships became Katowice, as I mentioned before. Sorry, actually, to just loop back on one thing Thorin was asking. I do think that at present, I think the last big tournament will be this EWC. Now, Monty, you were like, but what about a PGL? What about a StarLadder? What about all these places that could potentially come in and do something? They may. It would be, obviously, StarLadder's had some problems with world politics being where they are based.
Sure.
So that has obviously caused them some problems, and they did a lot of StarCraft in the past. And technically, I think StarCraft will be one of a project that doesn't quite cost as much as some of the other games to actually run and things like that. And there is a fervent fan base that could come along. I think that 8-month period of radio silence from everywhere really kind of made everyone just like wake up, and it's like, okay, well, whatever we get now, great, but we're not going to be holding out for things. I think everyone's kind of thinking about other plans of what could go on or what's going to happen after EWC, and not looking with it.
Yeah, and to be clear, there isn't an announcement of another GSL, and there isn't an announcement of anything after EWC, so...
No, correct.
Yeah. Oh, it can't just end, can it?
Famous last words.
I don't know.
Yeah. Like...
in terms of big circuit, nobody knows again. Which, I mean, obviously, when the EWC announcement comes, everybody's like, "Hooray!" Kind of, because it's $700,000 tournament. Of course, all our pros are like, "Hooray! I can keep practicing. I can, try and work towards this and become the world champion again." But we were saying at the end of last year, it kind of, to dispel anybody's concerns, it had to be like that ESL 3-year deal again, where suddenly everyone's like, okay, we are securing our position again. We can potentially have new blood coming up. This, after the 8-month hiatus of no news, suddenly we do have this, let's call it a 4-month block of StarCraft. But then what? We don't know. It sounds so pessimistic, but
I mean, look.
I have one quick thing to throw in here, which is I think the
me.
mistake of Blizzard and other companies like this, because by the way, I've seen this myopic approach in almost every single game. It essentially goes like this. They don't see these as sports that last 50 years. They see it as a video game that succeeds, and they're a publisher, and it's always about how do I like parlay as a stepping stone from this to my next game, and it's all about the next game. And if you see that, first of all, this happened in Counter-Strike most famously. By the way, Counter-Strike, one of the best examples of a golden goose, someone tried their hardest to kill repeatedly. Like, they had Counter-Strike, a mod someone else made for their game, Half-Life, but that through the SDK, they owned essentially like the IP rights to it, and so they were able to buy it off the guy. They just give it a game for free that the whole circuit's run by everyone else. They just go, yeah, but we're making Source, the sequel, so kill CS if you can. Let's just put our new game up there, which again hasn't yet got the massive player base and viewer base. Then you come along and you go to stuff like StarCraft. Similarly, they moved on to the other games and even took the characters and the IPs and went to the other games. By the way, the analogy there would be, famously, this is actually the reason why Steve Jobs was justifiably fired from Apple in the first place. He only cared about the next machine because he wanted technological progression and some sort of ideal. At the time, the people in Apple were like, our best-selling machine is the Apple II and everyone owns one. Why aren't we focusing on like still generating money off that? And his whole shit was like, forget about that. Put all that profit into the development of the next piece, because he just cared about the Macintosh and the iMac and all that shit that was coming later. And basically, if you look at this analogy, I actually think this has happened in every single game now. So you go and you look in League of Legends, one of the reasons I think they've stupidly let the viewership wind down in all these regions is because they spent so much time thinking that TFT and whatever the fighting game they were working on and the fucking every sort of game they were working on was going to be the next League of Legends. And so why would I stick with the Apple II as their analogy? But the premise in this scenario is your Apple II is the biggest game still, and it can sustain if you continue to feed it. So the weird thing is, all these devs, they're always like on to the next. Whereas in this case, what we're looking for is someone to be like a custodian of this scene and keep it alive and see how long this can last. Because I do think games like Counter-Strike, Quake maybe not as much because it's more of a 1v1 game in esports. So Counter-Strike, StarCraft, and maybe League of Legends soon have almost shown that if you actually get the right on-ramps of revenue, they can almost sustain forever. They seem like they could essentially, because bearing in mind, we're now learning maybe even American sports don't last forever. Maybe baseball one day will wind down. But I tell you what, it got a solid 100, 200 years out of it. The point is, it actually does look like if you did it right, you could maybe get like 30 years out of one of these esports games if you have the right patches.
Brood War's almost there right now.
It really does. Whereas I think they still see it as like the dream is every 5 years to have a new StarCraft, a new game. And it's like, I don't know if that but I don't mean as in a sequel to StarCraft. I mean like the next, they've always said it last 5 years, everyone's been going, what is the next big esports game? Guys, you've already got the esports games. You got all these golden geese. Like, yeah, but I want a bigger golden goose. Like, what are we doing here?
Well, what's coming next? What's coming next down the pipe, obviously, is probably as Saudi Arabia increases its stock in, how much number of shares it owns at these games development companies. They're probably, if they are going to be long-term interested in esports, which does remain to be seen, they're going to start. I think they're probably going to get a developer to produce a specific esports game for the sole purposes of fitting into the Olympics, which they're very big on, and they've obviously got that contract for the next 10 years. So the next big esports game will be some artificial slop, which has been essentially made by a developer so it can bypass all the Olympic values and fit nicely into international competition. So I'll be very intrigued to see what it is. But I agree with Duncan. We've got great games right now. I mean, StarCraft 2 is still holding it down, not just for its own scene, its own history. But
I will also say that just in terms of, and Kaelaris can speak to this, but in terms of the state of the game of StarCraft 2 right now, it's in a really good spot. We had to live through the fucking Heart of the Swarm nonsense, and the end, when they basically. If you guys haven't seen StarCraft 2 in a while, they did things in the game to increase the pace of the game, like giving you more miners at the beginning and stuff like that, that have made the game really very watchable right now, in my opinion. It's in a good spot.
So, again, multiple things. We have community patches, right?
Sure.
Blizzard doesn't actually make the patches. We had a balanced council for a little while that would come together, make the community patch, and then give it to Blizzard and implement it. one or two of those things have gone slightly awry to the point where maybe currently we have a bug in the game with Cyclones, so the unit, the Cyclone, which is definitely hindering esports a little bit. But unfortunately, because our progress or our communication chains or their ability to change things quickly for us is very, very lackadaisical. That has been in the game for quite a long time. However, that aside, the game, every time I watch finals, anytime I watch any tournament ever, the games are so good to watch. We're 15 years deep, and the games are so good to watch. These kids like Clem, Cyril, obviously, our top Koreans and stuff like that are fantastically competitive with one another, and the games are so back and forth, so fantastic. And if you'd have told me 15 years deep that our games were to look like this, I would have not believed you at all, especially after Heart of the Swarm, which was killing everyone.
It was real bad there for a while, guys.
Yeah.
Investor Broodlord was a rough time to be alive and watching StarCraft.
That was the end of Wings of Liberty, and then
Swarm
the Swarm
Host.
Host.
Yeah, Swarm Host, that's right. Yeah,
Swarm Host, yeah.
That was painful as someone who was casting Europe and doing hour-long games of nothing. But at the same time, though, because the games always got and continued to be great and fantastic, that's why the way in which Thorin was phrasing it, I thought was lovely. Like having a custodian, having a warden of a game like this, which is not going to go away. The competitive will always be there via community. Like Wardy, for example, is the GOAT of making community tournaments, running them, just getting them ticking along. His Patreon contributes 100% of like prize pool to the players, blah, 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 and all this stuff. It will always be there and continue to be there. It's just a case of if a major circuit's not there alongside it, then yeah, maybe some of the big players do retire. But there will be people still playing it, and it will be lovely to have those big players not have to retire so that they could continue alongside what has been 15 years of a great esport currently to just fade away. To me, it doesn't make any sense, personally.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with you, especially because, like, as Duncan already alluded to, you know, if there are people that are interested, and there clearly is that level of interest, there really is no need to kind of like move on from something. You know when I've worked a number of esports, you know when they're in a death spiral, you know when no one gives a shit anymore. Like StarCraft's endured for like a reason, and it's kind of weird to see like. I don't know, like, obviously a lot's happened at Activision Blizzard with the Microsoft takeover, and and let's also be honest, a number of scandals prior to that, right? They've obviously had a lot on their plate to kind of launder their reputations. But also as well, like, tournament organizers, I don't think they realize, like, at a time when we're doing everything, like, so big in esports, like Duncan says, everything has to be in a fucking stadium in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and if you're not doing that, you're not real.
And
like,
we need all the mainstream markers. We need like the BBC to tell us we're real, and we need the Olympics to come in. And again, to me, it's just like by reaching for the fucking stars, you actually forget you're on the fucking moon already, you idiots.
Yeah, yeah, correct. And like, you know, I think about like the StarCraft community. They've never struck me as a community that's been like greedy or ever wanted more than just like what James is talking about. Like, just give me a regular tournament circuit with decent prize money. You know, not amazing, but decent. You know, you're getting something for your time to compete in, and let's just broadcast that. I mean, put it this way, obviously, like, I'd love PGL to do a fucking run-back StarCraft tournament. I'd work that in a heartbeat. I'd be there for that. So, I mean, who knows what happens? I mean, obviously I won't be watching the Esports World Cup, but I will be watching the after effects of the Esports World Cup to kind of see if that, like, prompts anyone to be like, oh, yeah, you know, StarCraft 2's still a viable game to, like, run in 2025 and beyond. So, it'll be interesting.
I think something that people also kind of misconstrue a little bit is viewership numbers, right? Because everyone looks at, your peak viewership number. What are your peak viewership numbers like and things like that? And they equate, only peak viewership number with the success or decline of an esport. StarCraft 2 has something else that I think a lot of other esports don't, which is, yes, okay, say on Twitch or YouTube when a tournament is going on, you know, if it's a big tournament, 19, 20k peak, blah, 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 also, so whatever it may be on the English stream and then across other language streams and stuff like that. But what also StarCraft has is, one, very long broadcast days, so lots of people can't be tuning into a lot of that all the time. But then the voraciousness of our YouTube audience when it comes to VODs is unreal. StarCraft 2.
That's because we were all trained. Look, man, I never watched it live when I was, you know, paying for GSL. I only watched VODs.
Yeah.
I didn't give a shit about watching it live because it was in the middle of the night in America. So I just watched it the next day and it was fine.
Yeah, so StarCraft 2 still does so well on YouTube, be it the tournaments, be it the current content creators like Loco, for example, who's got like 500 and some thousand subscribers and stuff like that on his stuff. But like, if you go to like the EWC metrics of their VODs of the StarCraft tournament relative to all the other tournaments that happen there, the metrics are fantastic for StarCraft relative to other games that are bigger, should be bigger, you know, should be producing, you know, decent numbers as well. So every single time we have tournaments, our VODs on YouTube are always doing big numbers, but people can't be watching them live because, you know, people are too busy. People have a job. Our viewership audience is obviously a little bit higher average age than the standard esport now. And that's why they're not watching live. And that's why I do dislike this this analogy of, oh, okay, well, if it's not getting those live viewership numbers, then maybe it's in decline. Like,
well, also, it doesn't matter how many people you have if you can create a sustainable scene because the fans want to pay to support it. Period.
Yeah. Yeah,
and people do, as you can see. Like, again, the GSL Patreon had $11,000-$12,000 every single month. The RSL one that you were talking about before does currently, I think, have $11,000 a month and stuff like that.
And that just started, now, by the way, guys. It just started.
Yes. Literally, the day 2 of the broadcast was today as we're recording, which is just...
yeah, I was watching it.
Crazy stuff. Yeah. Now, there's a little contentious thing about the RSL thing, which is like actually not a huge portion of that goes to the prize pool, but I can, on the flip side, see what they're wanting to do, which is, okay, create a product, like get the studio, make the graphics, all of this stuff, all of this costs money,
it looks
a lot more than actually...
it looks more professional than any other like crowdfunded thing. I will say that from watching it. Like, they've done a good job with it.
Sure. Now, do I know whether or not like half of this is okay? So to play devil's advocate, do I know how much of this money is a lifestyle gig and they're just taking a good chunk of that money and having
I mean, let's be real.
I don't know.
$11,000 is $120,000 a year. It's not that much money.
It's not that much. I agree. But I think initially before the Studio Archon sponsorship, the prize pool may have been like 7% of the Patreon crowdfunding, which when it comes to other tournaments, I do know that they provide a whole lot more. And again, I'm not saying that this is the wrong thing to do or the right thing to do. I'm just saying that this is current or was a bit of a contentious topic in the community on the Reddit and things like that. But we'll see. They're on day 2 of their broadcast, right? Like they've got a long way to go for sure with all of this. And it's good that all of these initiatives are kicking up. A guy like Tasteless is one of the right guys to be doing it, I suppose, because he has pull, right? Like people.
Where's Artosis?
Well,
he's in Canada.
He moved away.
Yeah, but
he's a streamer now. The joke is he actually is a streamer.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
I have seen him stream. I've seen him get some clips on like live stream fails. But like, I would have thought this would have been right.
He even has his wife come on his stream now, and ironically, she makes fun of him.
Do you like Mario Erotica? Because if so, watch the stream.
Well,
no, you don't.
No, not a fan actually. Bizarrely, no. Wario erotica.
You might be at home. You might be at home.
You would have had me.
he got banned a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I saw that.
Of it.
That was why I checked him out, because I was like, I follow the account that announces when streamers get banned, right? Yes. And it just popped up, Artosis banned. I was like, what the fuck? Like,
what is this guy doing?
So went and checked it out, and it was like, I see why. So, but no, I just would have thought. Taste. Yeah, I just would have thought, obviously, he would have been involved somehow in the revival fucking StarCraft League without Artosis. Seems a bit weird.
Well,
but,
yeah, I mean, as you know, Artosis has about 700 children, so he wanted to move closer to his wife's family,
that's fair.
So that they could take care of them, perhaps, and
Yeah, no, I get it. It's tough. Esports with kids, but yeah, no, like it looks good. I'll definitely check that out. I can't believe that's actually started. Just as we're recording this episode. I'm sure that's probably why Monty wanted to do this episode. Actually, he does plan these things. No, we don't. We just turn up and talk shite. So.
Look, it was a good time just because all the stuff that's happening in StarCraft, and I figured it was fun to discuss the legacy of one of the most important esports in history and where it stands right now. Because I thought it's really at a crossroads, and it's at an interesting time. And like for you guys who may not know a lot about StarCraft, your game's time will come too. At this crossroads, like there is going to be a time where every game the developer just slowly starts to stop supporting the esports side, and whether the community picks up the slack or other tournament organizers pick up the slack is the big question, right? And there is going to be that transition period. Obviously, it's happened with a lot of the Activision Blizzard titles. Happened with Overwatch, where ESL picked up the entire Overwatch circuit.
By the way,
which is
Monty,
what they're
my
now
actual
running.
secret dream, I just don't tell people about because I don't want to fucking jinx it and have it not come true, is that in League of Legends, eventually when the viewership goes to shit, they just go, fuck it, you can have it to the ESLs, and then they just actually do way better tournaments and we have an open circuit. Similarly, by the way, I haven't told people this because it might be years down the line, but I don't work with the Saudis. Spoiler, the day they ever just say fuck, say yes and throw it away, I'll be back on all their fucking events. Why wouldn't I be? I love the game. I would love to work events now. I just don't want to work with them personally. So I actually don't think people have to view it. It's like when things go down economically, it's also an opportunity when all the bullshit goes away for legit things to establish themselves and to grow again.
Yeah, actually, you could make an argument to say, while it might not be as big, you could be a little bit envious of where StarCraft is right now, because in the absence of, the developer, like, sticking their fingers in the gumbo, people can just rock up and run a tournament.
And the community is paying for it, shockingly.
Yeah, which, like James is right. Like, there's two types of esports fan. There's the one I despise, which is the fucking, the Zoomer fucking kid that rocked up 5 minutes ago telling everyone how it should be, pays for nothing, wants everything, and is only really invested in the drama anyway, right? Or you have the esports fans that I meet when I go to events. People were willing to buy a fucking ticket, turn up, really engaged with the space, wearing merch. You're like, yeah, if we had more of you, we wouldn't be in this fucking mess. But unfortunately, the first type sort of dominates. But in StarCraft, it's like I say, it's always been one of those scenes where ultimately, once you got the casuals out, like, because there was a little bit of that at the start, you were only left with, like, real hardcore people that just, like, love the game, consume all the content. When they're not watching a live stream, they're watching a VOD, happy with pay-per-view, would be willing to pay for the right stuff. I mean, willing to pay just to have access to, 1080p or 720s it might have been back then. Access to the VODs they want to watch later. Like, it was a great community to work in. For sure, and it's good that it's still going in some shape or form. Definitely hope the Esports World Cup isn't some sort of sad send-off.
I mean, it would be depressing if this was like the last event and nobody even knew it was the last event.
Yeah,
right?
Because also as well, I mean, like, it's like, yeah, how do you handle that as a host?
Yeah,
like
you've asked a question that I have been thinking about ever since the announcement happened, actually. Which is like, okay, so I mean, actually, if you include Rotterdam, right, who's obviously probably going to be there in terms of the talent lineup, me and him have been there truly since the very formative, like some of those very early broadcasts, and so I mean, there was even a conflict of schedule where I might not have been able to do the StarCraft. Oh, wow. So I was livid. I was like, if I'm not at potentially the last big StarCraft event, my head's going to explode. That has worked itself out. And ever since the announcement happened, and without anything on the horizon, I have been thinking about how would I close that show as a well-versed host.
Yeah, I mean, Kaelaris, I've been in this position because, like I said, I did the last OSL season. I didn't know it was the last OSL season, and I would have done things differently had I known.
Yeah, of course.
Because the OSL was the crown jewel of OGN for like 15 years. And it was, to that point in time, and arguably still the most important tournament in Korean esports history. And I didn't know it was going to be the last OSL season, right? That's a bummer.
It makes me think, though, at the same time, when I'm ruminating over that thought process and stuff like that, how many people have had to be in the position where you are the host and you're potentially closing out on a 15-year major circuit. So I've not had anything on my plate recently, guys. A wedding, I was ill, like all of this other stuff. And then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna have to say something. There's going to be something, because I'm in my mind, I'm 99% convinced that this is the last big tournament. Like it's a, without all of the other community tournaments that are springing up here and there. So it's a tough one to ponder.
I mean, look, I always say when you're doing these things, you have to kind of be like, well, look, we've had some good times, and you have to do like a kind of mini retrospective, but also kind of be like, I hope we're going to be back, because like,
well, the other side of this is like,
Cup is trucking.
Like Brood War went way down for a while, and Brood War's back in a big way now. So you never know. What the future is going to hold. Yeah, but here's the thing,
Monty. Notice that the key framing we're missing here is people have been trained by modern culture anyway to be a consumer. You sit and passively consume whatever is on the channel that you were watching anyway, or the feed gives you through an algorithm. You don't hunt things out. Like, the joke is when people get fucking like cancelled, oftentimes they just go to a different website. If you just typed in that website, you're seeing all the shit, but you're like, where have they been? I used to miss that guy. So what I would say is, like I said before, I actually think a lot of these golden geese, spoiler, they're not really dead. They're just fucking buried at the moment. Like, Monty knows this. Like, people used to literally also, like GSL, pay to watch League of Legends that was in Korea, etc. I think if you had the right broadcast and the right people, etc., it wouldn't even have to be super expensive. People would pay again if it was like a compelling product, if they were part of something, if they did it. So I do think people do go too far thinking it like, but the point is, it's not going to be as simple as the dev's going to do it and provide all the money. You're going to have to be you're going to have to be an active participant in this scene, whether paying directly or being someone who's a talent who organises things, or initially, like any startup, gives a bit of your labour for free or not for the top rate that you could get from some other game in the industry. Everyone's got their own choices to make, but I do think these games can continue, because to me, one key detail that you're all nailing here that I never would, I'll tell you right now, Kaelaris, this is an interesting framing. I was one of those people who loved StarCraft Brood War, and I thought StarCraft 2 was shit compared to StarCraft Brood War, because it literally diluted down things I like. Like, by the way, I want it to be like mechanical bandwidth overload at the beginning with all the problems. I want stupid shit like that people don't. I don't want MBS, etc. I actually liked all these components.
I mean, that is what made Brood War one of the greatest esports games, because you could never be 100% good at it. You had to make choices about what you were doing, which created styles.
It's like someone coming along and taking chess and going, well, we've got to get with the kids, and then you make chess like simpler, or you take out some of the units, or like if you were a purist, you're going to hate that. But one thing I never expected for real was that actually StarCraft 2 would have true dedicated, like true believers. I thought at the time it's all Johnny-come-lately tourists who are on the new game, or it's the people who worked in the industry and were like, shit, I can make some money here. I'll say Flash was my favourite player. Never watched him play in OSL ever. But I've got to say, one thing that is enduring, and this is where the devs, with their hunt for the next game, have missed this completely, is that I think the first esports game you fall in love with, make any parallel you want to human relationships here, you never get over that game. You can have other great ones afterwards, you can have ones that are similar, you can have sequels that are good, but the first one, so what I essentially had to learn was there's people with that StarCraft 2 for them. It's been around long enough now. StarCraft 2 was their first. If it wasn't Brood War, they were there for Brood War. They were for Warcraft. So I think what you really see is the people who are in love with CS and in love with Quake and in love with StarCraft, in love with these games, if you actually cater to them, they're just a fan of that game, mate. They're not actually esports fans. They're not here to watch fucking Fortnite or some new game. They're just here for that game. And if you provide, I actually think those people will follow it like baseball or like American football, but they'll just follow it for 50 years. I believe it's real.
Especially with StarCraft for RTS, right? Because recently there was a lot of hoo-ha about what's the next RTS that's coming along and stuff like that. Is it going to be Stormgate? Probably not. Was it going to be Battle Aces? Cancelled recently.
Sadly, I really liked Battle Aces. I'm actually bummed about that.
Yeah, I guess Tencent didn't see the potential return on it from the player base that was coming along. But yeah, just like, and I held fervently for many, many years that it was always going to be nigh on impossible to follow what StarCraft 2 did in terms of its execution for a modern RTS, because it just feels, without some of the little nuances of problems, it just feels perfect. So difficult to get over that. Graphics, 15 years ago, still kind of timeless, still looks really fucking good. You know what I mean? Like, and never mind the mechanics of it all and things like that. Blizzard in the past was always very good at timeless graphics, actually. They did it kind of with like World of Warcraft, Warcraft 3.
Brood War still looks good, man. Whatever.
Brood War. Like, they were so good at nailing timeless graphics. But yeah, and those StarCraft people, they were always on the hunt for what's that next RTS. But I think they're all realizing truly there is no next RTS that will beat StarCraft 2 for them. It is StarCraft 2. And if somebody would just reach out their hand and say, okay, let's help you with this scene that already has all this history, all this infrastructure around it. Here's some handout. I think it could continue in a circuit form in one way or another.
Well, that seems like a good place to end our show, guys. Thank you to Kaelaris for coming on. Very enlightening. Hopefully you guys who don't know anything about StarCraft will check out possibly the last StarCraft event ever at the Esports World Cup this year, and perhaps see some excellent games to close out the major event cycle, or maybe we'll see more. Probably won't regret it either way. StarCraft is one of those timeless games that is always, always enjoyable. And do check out the RSL and the ASL that happen in Korea. If you guys are curious for English language commentary on that, they're still alive. If you like the grassroots feel of esports, I think you will enjoy these productions that are going on, as many other people are right now. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Esports Delenda Est.